the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
And good afternoon. Yes, welcome back. It is the home of common sense. Thank you to Julia. She's back tomorrow at 10 o'clock. Coming up this afternoon, MPs say there is no evidence of two-tier policing during last summer's Southport riots, calling the police response entirely appropriate, but have slammed prosecutors for making officers' jobs harder by letting fake news spread. I think this is genuinely a fascinating area of current life. But on that question, two-tier policing, fact or fiction? Details on that in a couple of moments. Also this afternoon, Energy Secretary Ed Miliband's net zero plans are being blamed for pushing British steel to the edge, with the Scunthorpe plant scrambling for raw materials to keep its blast furnaces running. You might have thought that not just this government, but previous governments would have been ahead of the game on this and thought this is going to only end one way if we don't make sure we're on top of it. Nobody really cared. More on that as well. And the army has been called in to help with Birmingham's bin strikes, which have left up to 21,000 tonnes of rubbish piling high in the streets. It's an absolute pit in some areas. It stinks. It's a health hazard. There's rats the size of flipping gazelles now. They're getting bigger by the day, it seems. More on that to come. Everything you need to know. All the breaking news right here on Talk 0344 499 1000. Let me put the question to you like that. Two-tier policing, fact or fiction? Now, this term, two-tier policing, it's actually had different names over the years. I suppose most commonly defined as just basic discrimination in some areas, but it did take a life on a life of its own. After the Southport riots, the central accusation was that these protests were policed more strongly than previous protests. Nowadays, groups of MPs have concluded that these claims are baseless, and that the way the police responded to the riots that swept the country last summer was entirely appropriate. That was the Parliamentary Home Affairs Select Committee. It's a cross-party committee. It has got a high proportion of Labour MPs on it, responding to violence and criminality that erupted in Southport and later elsewhere. They branded the claims as disgraceful that there was two-tier. This was not protest, MPs said. Those participating in disorder were not policed more strongly because of their supposed political views, but because they were throwing missiles, assaulting the police and committing arson. And I do believe that was the case. I mean, there's enough evidence that anyone with their own eyes can see a lot of cops getting attacked. We know what happened when the police got attacked at Manchester Airport. We all felt very strongly about that. We can't change our views on these things because we don't like the theme, but I get it. Something went out of control here. They say it was disgraceful to see police officers who bore the brunt of the violence being undermined by baseless claims of two-tier policing. During the riots, police officers were attacked. Shops, businesses, community centres, libraries damaged. Hotels, housing asylum seekers also targeted. This is the findings of the Select Committee. Organised disorder, they say, is rightly met with robust response. Any implied equivalence with planned non-violent protest is simply wrong. This is according to the committee chair, Dame Karen Bradley. Yeah, she's still knocking around. Around about 1,804 arrests were made, and there were 1,072 charges for disorder, with the majority for serious public order offences. Now, they were people who were guilty of public order offences. But is there two-tier policing at work here? And I'm going to declare this absolutely honestly. I mean, journalistically, I could play the mischievous game here and say, absolutely. There were things that were said on social media where people went to jail for a very long time that I have a huge problem, more so than I do someone throwing a brick at a copper's head and getting a long prison sentence. But the reason I'm torn on this, of course, is that I've been doing this job for quite a long time, and I can't remember an era where we didn't discuss two-tier policing, even though it wasn't really given that name. And now it rather handily, tier rhymes with Keir, which makes the whole thing, you know, much like Thatcher and the milk snatcher. It all works rather well. But what is the truth behind it. Now, black communities have argued forever that there's two-tier policing and two-tier justice, for that matter. Some of the stats might even bear this out until you read deeper into the headlines. But you take the point. That's been an argument forever. Even our good friends over there at Just Stop Oil argued two-tier policing and two-tier justice after a group of them was sentenced to, I mean, they got 4-year prison sentences for bringing the M25 to a standstill. And we all said, good, absolutely right. We didn't kill anybody, but it was a dumb thing to do. One of them, Roger Hallam, I think he's the leader over there at Just Stop Oil, he got a 5-year prison sentence for stopping some traffic. So the two-tier accusation is kind of alive and well. And we have forever, when I used to do a bit of court reporting, and I remember, constantly watching the most egregious and extraordinary serious crimes go to almost unpunished, a non-custodial sentence for paedophilia and sex offences. And, then you'd go the following week, I'll be at Maidstone or Canterbury Crown Court or wherever, and, somebody who'd, not paid their TV licence, getting 9 months. And you think, hang on a second, in this very court last week, the very same judge let somebody who downloaded porn, child porn, walk free. Somebody who didn't pay their TV licence just been slammed up for 9 months. I mean, my point is, I guess to a degree, it's always been there. And when it comes to the riots last year, of course, the obvious comparison is with 2011, where again, we saw people who were given pretty lengthy prison sentences. When on any other day of the week, I don't think those sentences were given. I sense, and apparently this doesn't come from Downing Street, but the judiciary or any form of government, Department of Justice, Home Office, whatever, the judiciary tend to really go big guns in a riot situation. That's my only conclusion. But is it more orchestrated? The sort of suggestion from those critical of our justice system and our police is that this was orchestrated. This was from the very top. They worked this out, right? These are right-wing nutters. That's what the likes of Starmer would have you believe. They're right. So therefore, we're going to lob them all into jail where we can. And that includes those who wrote bad words on social media. I mean, the social media thing, I think maybe is a slightly separate point. MPs were also said the criminal justice system failed to keep pace with the social media age, which created an information vacuum that allowed disinformation to flourish. Look, I don't know if we'd have known more about the Southport killer. I'm not absolutely sure that would have necessarily stopped riots. In fact, it might have possibly caused more of them. I mean, I think there is an argument on that. So I'm royally confused about this, and I know that my job is ordinarily to fall down on one side or the other on this, and I can clearly see where there are holes in lots of arguments that Yvette Cooper and Starmer and the like have put forward. But I'm intrigued by the question, two-tier policing, fact or fiction? Let's get a word on this and the other big stories of the day. Isabel Oakeshott is Talk's international editor and a regular with us on the programme. Isabel, good afternoon. Can I say Happy Easter, or is it too early, or is that even a thing?
Well, I want it to be a thing. I mean, we are a Christian country,
I'd
apparently.
forgotten about that, yeah.
And yeah, it would be, I think it's very important. So yeah, it's too, I mean, traditionally, actually, Christians don't say Happy Easter during the run-up to Easter. You only say Happy Easter on Easter Day, and certainly not on Good Friday, maybe borderline Easter Saturday. Remember, my dad used to go struggling through Lent without any beer and used to declare that Easter had begun very late on Good Friday.
Yeah.
But I think we're a little bit too early now.
Yeah, I'm with your dad, I think.
The debate that you've opened with, I think, is so fascinating, and people have really very, very strong feelings about it. And many of our listeners will feel, frankly, gaslit by a report that says, this is all in your imagination, people. There's no such thing as two-tier policing, because there were quite egregious examples of it. And you mentioned briefly what happened at Manchester Airport and the attack that we saw. It's not an alleged attack. You can see it on video, and how long it took the prosecution service to actually charge those two young men as a very obvious example. I think there's another dimension here that hasn't been explored at all and is really interesting, and that is the advice that was given, the legal advice that was given to those who were charged with, in the wake of the riots, with behaving very badly at the scene of the unrest. And almost without exception, these people seem to have been advised by duty lawyers to plead guilty to violent disorder. And that's a really unusual category of offence that automatically carries a very high penalty. And in many cases, I think that they were very, very badly advised by lawyers who, I'm sure for the best of reasons, I'd love to hear from a lawyer that was involved in those cases. For whatever reason, I'm not saying there was any conspiracy here, but I don't think that many of these people should have pled guilty. I think they might have had a much better chance of getting away with a custodial sentence. So was there two-tier policing or not? In my view, absolutely there was. You have to look at what happened in Hare Hills in Leeds, where there were very relatively few arrests, and I'm not sure how many have gone to jail for that. But I appreciate that, sometimes a story gets legs, and what's in the public mind is more exaggerated than the reality.
I mentioned 2011, and we've looked at this before, when, there was the famous case of I think he was a student that got 6 months for nicking a bottle of water out of Lidl or something. But that was when the riots were happening. And it's been argued, not unreasonably, Isabel, that, that was the same thing then. There was a similar thing going on. It was against the backdrop of public disorder and riotous behaviour are the kind of the worst scenarios for judges and the like, because they look at this as something that could, easily spiral into something even bigger. So they put out, a warning shot by way of heavy sentencing. Does that wash?
Well, I'm probably instinctively quite in favour of warning shots, in favour of, in terms of trying to regain public order. And I'd quite like to see some warning shots, for example, for petty theft, and for example, for carrying knives. So I'm conscious you've got to be consistent on this. And I'm saying I have to be consistent on it too. And you mentioned about the Just Stop Oil protesters. I actually think probably 4 years is too long for stopping traffic on the M25, even though I absolutely deplore what those Just Stop Oil protesters did and the disruption they caused. So I think there's a sweet spot, isn't there, between making an example of people and perhaps a custodial sentence for being part of a riot, even if you didn't hurt anyone, even if you were only on the fringes, is necessary to send a message to society that this isn't how we do things in Britain. But do people need 3 years or 2 years or even 1 year for that? A short, sharp spell would seem more proportionate to me. By the way, I think you're right about this whole thing about disinformation and lack of information about the Southport case. Would it have been any better? Would there have been less riots, less trouble outside migrant hotels had people known the so-called truth about the culprit? I actually don't really think so, because the bottom line is, although he wasn't he didn't come over here by boat, he was born in the UK. He was the child of relatively recent immigrant parents. They'd been given refugee status from Rwanda. That would have inflamed people. And my goodness, if people had seen the real photograph of the culprit, I think they would have gone nuts as well. So it's a really difficult one, that.
Indeed. We'll continue to take calls on that. And, of course, this as well, huge story. British Steel trying to reverse what they're calling Chinese sabotage of what's happened there in Scunthorpe. British Steel's woes should push ministers to cut Chinese firms from key infrastructure. MPs are warning amid fears of sabotage and reliance on imports. Exchequer Secretary to the Treasury James Murray spoke on Talk this morning. Let's have a listen.
The alternative is that we hadn't come in on Saturday to change legislation in Parliament, that we weren't stepping in with having officials on the ground trying to get the raw materials into the blast furnaces, and the blast furnaces would therefore be closing. And if they closed, then we would be on the hook for north of £1 billion worth of costs as a result of land remediation and dealing with workforce issues and so on. So the best way of us stepping in, the best way of us intervening is to make sure that we keep the blast furnaces going. Because Jingye had been behaving irresponsibly in the last few days, saying they were going to accelerate the closure of the blast furnaces. We need to keep them going to help secure the future of steelmaking in the UK.
Speaking with Mike Graham on The Breakfast Show this morning. I mean, this is a bit of a mess, Isabel, and I said at the very beginning, I think we can go, I mean, this government have not been great on this, but previous governments haven't either, really. The Chinese have sort of had their merry way. There's been a big fat green go sign whenever the Chinese came to town, and nobody's really bothered about it too much until now.
I mean, what absolute astonishing naivety on the part of the last government to ever allow the Chinese to get their long tentacles into this incredibly important asset. When will governments wake up and understand that the Chinese are not our allies? They are quite the opposites to that. And, they largely consider the UK either irrelevant or just another kind of asset that they could acquire by hook or by crook, and by stealth or directly or however it may be. The idea that we're going to be able to do amiable, cooperative, equal footing business with the Chinese regime is completely insane. And anyone who's studied the tiniest bit about how the Chinese regime operates all over the world should understand that there's one word that dominates it. It is exploitative. Yeah.
There's no doubt about it, and that is, that's their kind of MO, isn't it? That's how they function, that's how they roll. They wouldn't even deny it.
Yes, I mean, it's a kind of modern day colonialism that is all over the world. They are going around, and including, by the way, in many of our Commonwealth ally countries, small Caribbean nations that desperately need friends. They need investment from overseas. They don't get much joy from the UK, that seems to not really be tremendously interested in working in partnership with them. So when the Chinese come along and say, hey guys, would you like a new airport, or would you like a new port, or would you like some new road systems? They say, well, yes, please. And, never mind the small print, because actually we really would need this airport. And, this is a way that the Chinese regime is getting a footprint all over the world. And nobody should be any doubt about this. It is a modern day colonialism.
Yeah, spot on. Isabel, stay with us. Back with more from Isabel Oakeshott in just a couple of moments. Over to you as well. Two-tier policing. How are you seeing that? Fact or fiction? Howard says, come on, stopping the M25 for hours cost the economy millions. Should have got longer. I don't necessarily think, as Isabel said, I think 5 years in jail. I mean, don't get me wrong, the Just Stop Oil lot, tar and feather the characters with their own oil, if you like. I don't know what you do with that, but 5 years in jail? And if it's about protest, I mean, you could argue that any protest holding up traffic, no matter legitimate protests even, cost our economy millions over the course of any year, because the policing of them has to be handled as well. So whether you're talking about pro-hunting, the pro-hunting march that took place, which I think was the second biggest protest in history at the time, or whether you're talking about Just Stop the War protests, all of those required millions and millions of pounds worth of resources as well. I wonder whether, in that respect, we should be looking at other forms of sentencing for those kind of offences and breaches. I mean, the Just Stop Oil lot were a royal pain in the butt for a long time, and it never seemed to stop, did it? And we went for ages of nothing much happening, and then suddenly, wham, these big old prison sentences were wheeled out, and many people applauded. What do you get, though, if you throw a brick at a copper's head during a riot? I mean, I think that probably, you're playing the moral equivalence here. I think that goes up there as well, surely. Details on the way. More from you. 0344 499 1000.
By the way, I've heard in the last few days that Tata Steel, who, of course, have done the deal with the government, they shut the blast furnaces down at Port Talbot last autumn. They are going to build a new electric arc furnace, but I'm told they'll never turn it on because it'll never be viable, but they will have banked the hundreds of millions of government support. This is the sort of madness and nonsense that's going on because of net stupid zero, and it drives me bonkers every day of the week.
And nobody can afford to run either of these places, any of them.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Looking at the big stories of the day, Isabel Oakeshott is with us, Talk's international editor. I mean, this one is extraordinary, Isabel. The Manchester Arena plotter, Hasham Abidi, attacking 3 police officers in jail with boiling, I think it was boiling butter, as it turned out, and some homemade blades as well. One officer stabbed in the neck, another had a punctured lung, a third suffered third-degree burns from the attack as well. This character is serving 55 years. The bit that my takeaway from this, Isabel, was, you know, how would this man, bearing in mind this is a guy who knows how to make bombs, for goodness sake, how would he be allowed near any kind of implement of any description?
Yeah, I mean, it seems extraordinarily foolish to give him any access to that sort of equipment. Didn't he was working, I think, in the prison kitchens, something like that, and managed to fashion weapons out of items that he found in the kitchens. Now, I'm sure they don't exactly readily distribute knives, but wasn't he able to make a weapon out of some strips of metal from other cooking utensil?
Yes, a tray or something, yeah.
I mean, what do you do with somebody like that? He's been given a whole life in prison, will die in prison, almost certainly. Presumably he should just be in solitary confinement forever. I mean, I don't know. What do you do with someone like that? Well,
indeed, and I was thinking about this earlier when I was listening to Mike talking about it, and I thought, well, I guess if you're someone like him, and somebody who not only has been given 55 years in jail, he's not going to be coming out, but also someone who philosophically hates the system by definition of what he did, then I guess you just don't care, do you? It wouldn't bother you if you injured a prison officer or tore the place up. You've got nothing to, literally, you've got nothing to lose.
Yeah, and that's sort of the problem. And then, I can imagine that some of our listeners, I'm sure, will be thinking, well, that's a case for the death sentence. If people, I don't, by the way, I don't believe in the death sentence. I abhor it. I hate it. But with a case such as this, I do find myself a bit conflicted because, someone's done something absolutely heinous that has cost tremendous number of loss of life.
Sure.
And once incarcerated, continues to harm others. What do you do with them? I mean, I'm not in favor of putting someone to death just for convenience, but as you say, they've got nothing to lose anymore.
And I would have kind of assumed you'd be in some sort of segregation anyway when you've committed those kind of offences. But again, I heard from somebody who works in this field who said, actually, if you're a lifer, you kind of do all right in terms of the relative freedoms within the confines of a jail that you have. And, life rubs along and you're largely left alone. I can't imagine why anybody would leave this character alone, other than in a locked cell that nobody could ever get to.
Yeah, and that's the difficulty. I suppose if you're a lifer, it's sort of recognise that you've got nothing. They don't really have much leverage on you, do they? Because
yes.
For others, they're seeking early release for good behaviour, or they're seeking other privileges. I mean, I suppose it comes down to, can you in some way exert leverage on the basis of privileges? And being in solitary confinement would be absolutely horrific for any length of time.
Yeah.
But I suppose with a character such as this, they're basically unhinged anyway. So logic isn't necessarily going to apply. This is not somebody who says, oh, well, I think I won't throw hot fat over somebody because it might mean I've got a little bit of a more uncomfortable situation for a while. They're not making those calculations.
No, not at all. Final one here. The Army has been deployed to tackle the Birmingham bin strikes after Angela Rayner requested help amid a deadlock over job cuts and pay reductions. Let's hope they can get it under control before more rats like this one on Sky News start to pop up. Have a look.
I'm looking forward to going around, eating rubbish wherever I can see. I'm a Selly Oak brat, so in Selly Oak all the students litter all their rubbish and it doesn't get collected, and I'm very, very happy to be going around, eating their food, having lots and lots of babies with my wife, and really increasing the rat population in Birmingham.
By what date does the council think it will have reduced the backlog, reduced the rat population, and returned our streets to an acceptable state?
And Isabel, I mean, look at the size of that, not just a rat there, but a talking rat, and not just a talking rat, but a political talking rat as well. I mean, that's the stage we've got to.
You know what, I like this stage. This is such a British stage, isn't it? It's the stage where we all start getting a bit of a sense of humour about it, and the people in costumes appear. And I'm sure that's just the beginning. But it's all very well for me to be sitting here in my nice environment feeling that this is all a bit of a laugh. It isn't a laugh if you're a resident. It really isn't. And it's not a laugh in terms of what it tells us about the absolutely wretchedly sorry state of our country. That this has been allowed to drag on for as long as it has is utterly reprehensible. And I don't know, people in Birmingham must be so despairing of it. But again, I've said this before, there are also people who need to look to their own behaviour here about fly tipping that's taking place. There's almost never an urgent need to throw out a mattress, guys. Hold on to your mattresses until this is sorted out.
You might think you'd just do that instinctively, but there are some mucky characters out there who don't play by the rules, it seems. I do want to get a final word on this as well, Isabel. It is always worth reminding us, of course, we thought at the beginning, will Labour have control over channel migration? Are they on it? I thought they wouldn't be on it, but it turns out that Keir Starmer had a great plan after all. Let's have a reminder and a listen to the Prime Minister in action.
You will have helped to smash the gangs, secure our borders, and save countless lives. Smash the criminal gangs, and they are criminal gangs, that are running this vile trade and putting people in the boats. Take those gangs down. I think smashing the gangs that are taking people's money is a deterrent. I think you have to smash those gangs. The only way to stop that is to smash the gangs that are running this vile trade. Smash the gangs.
So that was his plan, Isabel. He wants to smash the gangs, of course. It was a wholly ludicrous, frankly, just a stupid way to attack this. Worse than Rishi's stop the boats in many respects, but he keeps saying it and Yvette Cooper keeps saying it. And while they're trying to smash the gangs, 8,000 people, 46% rise on last year, have made it over the channel, including 656 on Saturday alone.
I mean, the only thing they're smashing is all records for the number of crossings in a short period. And they're also smashing records for total incompetence on this issue. And that's quite hard to do because there's never been anything other than government incompetence on this issue. And from every government that has presided over it, every Prime Minister has failed. And this is a growing crisis. If either the Prime Minister or the Home Secretary think that they can somehow assuage voter frustration by continuing to talk about smashing the gangs whilst doing nothing of the sort, and even if they did smash them, it wouldn't make any difference because more would pop up to serve the market, then they are utterly deluded.
100%. And this situation looks to get a whole lot worse as we move into the better weather and the spring and summer months. Isabel, thank you as ever. Enjoy the rest of your day. Isabel Oakeshott with us on the programme, our international editor here on Talk. Over to you on the two-tier policing question. I'm intrigued by that. We are going to talk to a former police and crime commissioner and a criminal defence lawyer on this point. The other aspect of this story This is reference to the Home Affairs Select Committee, was the bit that MPs said that criminal justice had failed to keep pace with the social media age, which created an information vacuum, allowing disinformation to flourish. How the hell do you ever police that? I would say with reasonable confidence that the majority of stuff I tend to see now on social media is either a complete invention or a sort of slightly mischievous even version of the truth. And it doesn't matter what subject we're talking about. It could be about Katy Perry going into space. I mean, who's going to put... Oh, she is going into space, apparently. This afternoon, Katy Perry takes off. She's going up there to orbit the Earth or something. Mars. She's going to Mars, apparently, we are told officially. We'll bring you details on that. I'm not making that up, by the way. But if you look at social media, it's an absolute sewer out there. How does social media keep up with criminal justice, or how does criminal justice keep pace with social media? 0344 499 1000.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Mo in Leicester says you get a 2-year sentence for social media posts, but a Labour MP gets a suspended sentence for a vicious attack on a constituent. Of course there's no two-tier policing, although that would be two-tier justice rather than policing. My only point to that, and again, I don't... The history is riddled with examples such as that. You can go back 20 years and more, and certainly when I started doing this for a living, I can't think of a time when we didn't discuss, you know, how it could be that somebody who committed this offence didn't go to jail, but somebody who did this offence did go to jail, or they got a bigger fine, etc. They're not always the same judges at the same time. It's not as if these trials are happening in parallel in the same room and someone's going, on balance, you did worse than they did. They happen, you know, separately and independently, but it does. Mo is right. I mean, of course you scratch your head and go, what sort of world is that? How can that be the case? And in fact, Mo mentioned a suspended sentence for a vicious attack on a constituent. There's far worse cases where somebody didn't get a prison sentence. I mean, some of the worst, I mean, there's some real exceptions perhaps, but they are there. This, of course, is the story of there being no evidence to support claims of two-tier policing during last summer's riots. That's according to a report by MPs investigating the violence that followed the Southport stabbings. While the police response was deemed appropriate, prosecutors hampered efforts by allowing fake news about rioting to spread. There's a couple of things to get into, and this in a moment. We'll speak to Raj Chadha, criminal defence lawyer. But first, Festus Akinbaseye is a former police and crime commissioner. Festus, good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon, Ian.
Nice to have you with us. I mean, you would have heard this phrase, two-tier policing. It's been around for a long time. Different groups over the years have sort of claimed it, perhaps not using that term. But members of the black community have argued it forever in terms of the way they have been treated. The Just Stop Oil protesters are now arguing two-tier justice because they got 5 years for holding up a motorway. What, in your experience, is the truth when it comes to that phrase, two-tier policing? Is that fact or fiction?
You are very, very right, and in fact, very perceptive in kind of identifying the historicity of this kind of narrative with policing. And the police can never win either way, right? So whether it's around stop and search or use of police force, whether it's around the policing of protests from the right or from the left, or for whatever cause, there's always some kind of allegation of overhanded policing, inappropriate policing, or preferential treatment. My thing is this, right? And this is coming from me as somebody who's been on the front line as a warranted special constable or as a police and crime commissioner, equivalent to a mayor with responsibility for policing, is that we cannot have a society where people feel that they can take the law into their hands and smash up properties, burn down buildings, set up random checkpoints on our streets, and just burn hotels and things like that. In the same way that we saw in 2011, where you had hoodlums and thugs going around robbing people, burning buildings, stealing things from shops, following the fatal shooting of Mark Duggan. We cannot have that. So either we have law and order on our streets, and the police are supported with robust powers to deal with these hoodlums, or we have anarchy from whoever, whether you're black, white, Christian, Muslim, I don't care who you are. You do not have the right to go around smashing up shops, threatening people's lives. We need to follow due process. End of.
Is there I mean, I've had a lot of communication on this, as you'd imagine, Festus. One here from James in Dorset, who says, two-tier policing in a nutshell. Palestinian riots every weekend in London. Please stand by and watch. Whereas a peaceful, patriotic gathering in Weymouth last summer saw the police handing out riot gear and getting the dogs out. I was there, and if it had escalated, it would have been because of the heavy-handed police response, says James. I mean, there was that. I mean, the Palestinian, I don't think there were riots every week. There were Palestinian protests every week. There were pockets of gyp that happened. Yeah. But there was a sense that some of those people were definitely walking around with some pretty offensive signs and, you know, signs that, you know, if, I don't know, somebody from a more right-wing organisation had held up an equivalent sign, they'd have been cuffed and sent to clink. What's your response to that when that happens?
I think there's only some arguments to be made for the fact that it took the police some time, talking about the Met specifically, because that's where a lot of these protests primarily took place in London, to catch up with the strength of public feeling about some of the nasty chants and paraphernalia being held up by some individuals around Westminster. So I totally agree with that. But eventually we saw situations where some of the protesters were actually challenging the Metropolitan Police for a heavy-handed approach to arrest and dealing with them. Look, what I say here is this, that the police, in fact, where I somewhat agree with you with your opening remarks and with the committee, the police is still living in the 19th or even the 17th century when it comes to information sharing. When I was police and crime commissioner, which is for some of your listeners who do not know what that is, you know, you effectively have the oversight of policing in your area. You hold the budget, you hold the chief constable of the Metropolitan Police Commissioner equivalent accountable. Was that I was saying to them, why is it that when there's a major incident that could potentially inflame public anger, why are the police so backward in putting information in the public domain because you're afraid of compromising an investigation? Mate, you've already got the pictures, videos, names of people already being circulated on social media. You can't just keep quiet and wait for the CPS. You know, you have got to plug that vacuum, otherwise rumors, false narratives will start spreading. So I think that's something that the police need to really get their act together on and do better in putting information in the public domain.
Yeah, and that was certainly central to well, certainly the MPs in that report identified that that was a fairly central problem here. I don't know, I mean, how do events catch up with the social media age? I mean, it's quite tricky. If you know, the judiciary can't be a running commentary on everything. There may well be good reasons sometimes, as you know, Festus, why certain details can't be released. And in the case of Southport, my thinking on this is that perhaps I mean, had they released some of the detail of this person, I mean, the riots could have been even worse, perhaps.
Well, look, what we did see happening was a very, very bad, violent, divisive riot anyway, right? So I just think that we need to have a much more pragmatic, contemporary approach to how we deal with information sharing. In the United States of America, they are very, very proactive in putting information into the public domain.
Yeah.
And we don't see widespread riots about that. I think we need to just stop saying that because we've always done things like this, thus forever must it remain the same. The bottom line, as I see it, is that we cannot have a society where people feel it is appropriate for them to take the law into their own hands and start destroying property, threatening people, whatever their cause might be, and the police can do a lot better in making information available to the public to quell misinformation from spreading across social media.
Listen, Festus, great to have you on, sir. We will speak again, I'm sure. He is Festus Akinbosoye, former Police and Crime Commissioner. Let's get a word from Raj Chadha, criminal defence lawyer at Hodge, Jones and Allen. Raj, good afternoon to you, sir. You're a seasoned lawyer, a very respected man in the world of law. Just give us your observation. When you hear the phrase two-tier policing, firstly, what do you take from that?
I don't understand it or don't recognise it in the way that it's been used in recent times, in the last 6 months or so. And really, I'd sort of share the Select Committee's view that it's disgraceful.
I was arguing, making the point that the phrase might have been new, two-tier policing, but the accusation has always been there from some. Black communities have argued for a long time that, and nobody called it two-tier policing then, but they've said, actually, you know, we are treated differently. And if you look at the stats, some of those will bear that out. Even the cool kids over there at Just Stop Oil are arguing that there's some form of two-tier justice with their fairly lengthy prison sentences. So it's not entirely new, but it's now got a funky new name, two-tier policing, and tier rhymes with care, which makes it rather delicious, of course, for headline writers. But I mean, there's always going to be examples, right? In one courtroom in Hull, somebody gets a prison sentence. In a courtroom in Plymouth, they don't get a prison sentence, and the one in Plymouth appeared to be the more serious crime. That bit is true, isn't it? There's discrepancies.
There can be discrepancies because every court will have discretion to look at the particular circumstances and the detail both of what has been done in relation to the offence, but of the offender themselves. But what is being alleged is something much more fundamental in relation to two-tier policing during the course of the riots. They were saying that these riots were policed differently because of the political views of those that were rioting. And as the Select Committee said, it wasn't because of their views, it was because that some of the stuff was very, very violent.
Yeah.
Officers being doused with petrol, hostels, asylum hostels being attacked. And that is why there were very exemplary prison sentences being imposed. And the example of where there are discrepancies which can be unjustified are where there is hard data. And you've identified really where ethnic minorities have been traditionally discriminated against in stop and search and sentencing outcomes. Then we need to take action on that. If there is no data, but simply rumour, misinformation, then we have to say so.
Well, what is your take on this whole idea of the criminal justice system catching up with social media when you were studying law. But I know you're only a young buck, Raj, but, you know, I'm sure back, like myself, back in the day when you were thinking, you know, I'd quite like to be a lawyer, social media didn't exist, of course. And now we live in this 24/7 world where everyone has the stage, everyone has the mic, everyone has the conch. Information is out there 24/7. It's, you know, often completely distorted and invariably invented. But nonetheless, it's a huge platform for millions of people. How does criminal justice catch up with that? What is it supposed to do? How should it react?
I think it is difficult, and there is clearly an issue in relation to how social media is being used by some. I think how the criminal justice react relates to another issue that came up during the course of the Select Committee report, which is that about trust. Social media exists where there is, in misinformation, exists where there is no trust amongst or within our established institutions. And what was very, very clear is that during the course of the summer, when the police, the CPS, or the government were saying something, they couldn't compete with what was going on in social media, not just because of the technology of social media, but because people have lost trust in those institutions. They don't believe what they're being told. And I think that's fundamental to our democracy.
Yeah, and the social media compounded that, I suppose, hasn't it, really? Because, I mean, if you look at, you know, there's a strand of thought that no institution should be trusted. Everybody is lying to us, whether it's governments, whether it's organisations that are connected to governments. It's a big fat lie, and don't believe anything that you're told. And I suppose that gets out there. Some people tend to believe some of it, and in some cases they believe all of it.
I think that is right, but that means that it's incumbent upon those institutions to fight back with truth, as it were. And I think it's really, really damaging to our institutions where they are caught out in lies or issues in which they haven't been straight with the public. So it is a virtuous circle. Yeah. As I say, it's not just the technology. There has to be change within our institutions to face up and say, look, we're going to level with you, and we may need to look at the laws on contempt. We may need to look at different regulations. But I think within the vacuum that exists, those that have their own political agenda exploited it, and then violence ensued. And I think that's the real lesson of what happened last summer.
Listen, Raj, thank you, sir. Great to have you on with us. Raj Chadha, who is a criminal defence lawyer at Hodge Jones and Allen. Thank you to him. What are your takeaways from that, and our previous voice, Festus, as well? This is not a straightforward, this happened, end of. There's lots of tentacles and nuances to this, which is why I think it's quite fascinating. I guess the accusation when people talk of two-tier justice or two-tier policing, I think implicit within that is that it's come from above. That's what this is about, isn't it? This is like Starmer's henchmen. Of course, you'd have to realistically go, well, were they Rishi's henchmen? When a lot of this stuff happened under the Tories, and the previous riots, 2011, certainly happened under the Tories. I mean, I don't know how we even begin to square this, and how we, because I don't want our criminal justice system to be you want to believe you've got a great criminal justice system, right? The best in the world. That's how it should be. Our cops are the best in the world. Thoughts on this? 0344 499 1000.
What is this fundraiser for?
It's called #TheyKnew, because people at the top of the police, of social services, of the council, all knew what was going on and chose to ignore it. They turned away. I've spent 20 years sharing the truth and the evidence with police complaints, with the IOPC, with the government, with the Home Office. The evidence is there.
And you resigned your job to do so?
I resigned my job, but nobody wants to hear it.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
And of course, we will keep you up with that super duper space news that Katy Perry is about to be fired off into space in a rocket. If you ever wanted a headline that is going to sort of smack of the upside down weird 21st century world we live in, it's that. Katy Perry is about to be placed into a rocket and launched into space. This is her joining an all-female crew on Blue Origin's New Shepard rocket. It's a suborbital flight. It'll take the crew 100 kilometres above Earth before returning in about 11 minutes. It's very short. I think this is the thing that, or similar thing that William Shatner did. Alongside Perry, our journalist, pilot and fiance of Jeff Bezos, and CBS's Gayle King. Was Lauren Sanchez the... Yes, that's right, yeah. Yes, Lauren Sanchez, Bezos' other half, and CBS's Gayle King are all going up. And I would imagine there's some people who actually know about space as well in there. You'd like to think there was actual astronaut, scientific people. Yeah, it's happening this afternoon. So, and there's images out there. They're all very, very happy. They're having a big kind of love-in. I think Bezos is there as well. Or is that just a bald bloke that looks like Bezos? I don't know. We'll bring you the details when it takes off and when it lands. Let's go to your calls. Lots to get through here. This is Dan in Portsmouth. How you doing, Dan?
Hi, mate. Very good, thank you. Good show as usual.
Thank you, mate. Two-tier policing, fact or fiction?
No, I've got to say, anyone with half a brain and some eyes in their head can see it as a fact. The problem we've done is we painted ourselves into a corner, calling it two-tier policing. It's two-tier justice. The policing is two tiers. There's loads of evidence of it. The huge Muslim gangs armed to the teeth being told to just pop their weapons back to the mosque and go home. That was two-tier policing, clearly. You see it all the time, but the main thing is that two-tier justice is what I'm more concerned about, because justice takes care of the policing. The policing can be wrong, and the idea of our system is that the justice wheedles out the two-tier policing, and you may have to spend an uncomfortable night in the cells, but the justice sorts it out.
No, I get that, but my problem with this, Dan, is haven't we always had this to a degree?
No.
Because, a young black kid would tell you that there's two-tier policing, and they're the victim of it. He'd say, this happened to me all the time. I get pulled over. My white mates don't get pulled over. Why is that different?
Well, it is different because that's basically the same reason why an old lady doesn't get pulled over. The police operate, well, they should anyway, they should operate on the system of, going for descriptions, who'd committed the crime, who are the people that we're looking for, what are their descriptions, what do they look like. And unfortunately, and very sadly and inconveniently for everyone, the main perpetrators of these crimes. If you go to a middle-class school, generally in the West Country, and check a lot of young middle-class white kids, probably aren't going to be carrying a knife. If you did the same to an inner city...
But you would... It's still argued that even if you were in, I don't know, leafy Surrey somewhere, and you're a black guy driving around in a BMW, you're going to be stopped before me or you are going to get stopped, Dan. And it's believed that...
Simply by virtue of the fact that the chances are, if you're stopping and searching, the police don't really do it anymore. They're not allowed to, it's frowned upon. But if you're stopping and searching for the type of people that are going to be carrying, it's an uncomfortable truth.
It's true, and also in a similar uncomfortable truth, the police would say, look, if we're going to turn up at a riot situation, then we need to judge operationally where it's likely to kick off. Now, if some pensioners are having a saga sit-in, because of problems with their insurance policy, that's probably not likely to kick off. But if the EDL are getting together because they believe something's gone wrong with Britain, there's a greater chance it will kick off. That will be the police's assessment.
I'd like to make 2 points if I've still got time.
Briefly if you can, Dan.
2 points. I went on one of the big marches last year, right, with the Unite the Kingdom march, the big huge one in, I think it's June or July. I was a steward actually on that day.
Okay.
And the police showed up, even though there'd been history. The march before that was very peaceful.
Yep.
And they showed up ready for war. They really did. And it was embarrassing. They were embarrassed because there wasn't a single incidence of outrage. They did their very best to try and provoke some by allowing some lone Palestinian maniac to walk straight through the march amid all the deck chairs and the old people with their Union Jacks. But they turned up ready for war, and there was no such thing. And the other thing I'd like to say is that poor woman who's in jail at the moment for writing that inadvised tweet.
Listen, you'll get no argument from me on the length of that prison sentence. Off the scale, disproportionate.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Good afternoon. Welcome back to the home of common sense, 3 minutes after 2 o'clock. Now, MPs say there is no evidence of two-tier policing during last summer's Southport riots, calling the police response entirely appropriate. But they have slammed prosecutors for making officers' jobs harder by letting fake news spread. How could they have addressed that better? What is the answer to that in the sort of 24-hour social media world we now live within? And two-tier policing, fact or fiction? We'll have more response from you on the way. Also this afternoon, Energy Secretary Ed Miliband's net zero plans being blamed for pushing British steel to the edge, with Scunthorpe's plant scrambling for raw materials to keep its blast furnaces running. We'll get some more detail on that, but there's the ineptitude of this and previous governments on what is happening with British infrastructure and industry like steel has been horrific. I think we can all agree on that. And one of Britain's largest police forces has been criticised for a tick-box diversity drive that encouraged people with no qualifications at all and little or no English to apply to join the force. I think I know what they were doing there. We'll have more on that as well. Everything you need to know, all the breaking news right here on Talk 0344 499 1000. Sean in Gloucester says the Commons report, this is reference to two-tier policing, is without doubt marking their own homework. For as long as we've been taken to the left, probably starting with Blair, this country has been on a downward trajectory. Now with net zero, two-tier policing and all this woke nonsense, this has been supercharged so much that I genuinely fear we are finally broken as a nation. The longer it goes on, the more drastic action will be needed, if not already it's not already too late. Our only possible saviour is Nigel and the Reform Party, and boy, will they have their work cut out. Or we become the 51st state of America. Yeah, I'm not sure that's going as well as some people expected, though, Sean, over there in the US of A. I mean, Donald Trump ain't blinking once. He's blinking a couple of times on that tariff thing. It's all over the place. I know it's not straightforward, and you are allowed to change your mind on things, and you have to sort of react as events unfold. I do understand that. But the bit that Trump really got right, and I don't think this is the driving force for everything in life, but it's essentially the whole point of just speaking the language of everyday people rather than speaking from press releases or what a special advisor has told you to say. And whenever you hear, I don't know, you know, if the example most recently was Yvette Cooper was interviewed, and she was asked during an interview about her reaction to the couple that were visited by 6 officers because they'd written some things on a WhatsApp group about their kids' school. And Yvette Cooper did the usual, well, I haven't really had a chance to read the full, there was that. Well, I don't believe that. And it's not for me to, to comment on operational matters and all that. And what you really want is a Home Secretary to go, this is absolutely bloody nonsense. This is barking mad. We don't want to live in a world where this happens. It's outrageous. You want to hear a little bit of that. And I think we're now in an era, and I don't want politicians just playing to social media either, because that is a danger with that. But I would like, I think we've changed a little bit, and our thirst for honesty and truth and authenticity from our political masters demands, I think, something better than we've had in recent years. Let's get a word on all the big political stories of the day. Alan Tolhurst, chief reporter at Politics Home, back with us. Alan, good afternoon to you.
Afternoon, Ian.
So, nice to have you with us. So the Home Affairs Select Committee said no evidence of two-tier policing. This is cross-party committee, of course, largely made up, I think, of Labour MPs, but then so is the House of Commons, I guess. Sean, our previous communicator, Alan, said this is politicians essentially marking their own homework. What do you say?
Well, I mean, the politicians weren't the ones doing the policing, so it wasn't them going out there. But yeah, I can understand why people might think there was some criticisms last week. But this is a pretty thorough investigation by MPs. It's been going for a long time, and obviously it's been signed off by, as you say, a cross-party group. Though it is obviously chaired by a Conservative MP, Karen Bradley. Yeah, I think it's interesting. I think more interesting, I think, from the report is this idea that they didn't really. That the prosecution, the CPS, didn't allow the police to make statements to kind of allay some fears that people had. And I think this has happened quite a few times. We saw, do you remember with the case of Nicola Bulley, the woman who ended up taking her own life? Yeah. There was a lot of kind of questions about what was going on. The police knew more, but they weren't being allowed to say that, and it allowed this kind of vacuum to be created. I think the same thing happened with the Southport killings, and I think that this is going to have to lead to a big review, I think, of the way that the police and the prosecution service communicate when there are big cases, because we've seen what happens when this vacuum is created on social media. It leads to kind of disinformation being spread, either through kind of accident or by bad actors. And I think a lot of the kind of the rioting and stuff that could have been shut down early if there had been a more open and honest situation, which we all knew we were going to get the information anyway, because once Axel Rudibakana was charged, we were going to find out information about him anyway. So why leave that kind of space before him being charged to allow these sorts of things to happen?
I did hear somebody telling me off the record that actually a lot of the serious information, this guy was found with a sort of bomb-making compound in his room. A lot of that stuff wasn't known on day one. It was known probably on about day 3, and by then riots had already kicked off anyway. So that a lot of that subsequent information, which is now kind of being almost reverse engineered to say, well, if we knew about this, some of it wasn't known. And in fact, the person I was speaking to said, don't overstate what you think Home Secretaries and Prime Ministers get to know, because although they quite like going into TV studios saying, yes, we clearly knew within about 3 minutes I got the phone call, they don't always know that quick. They clearly get more detail than the rest of us, but the fuller detail they would also have had to, by definition, there would have been a period where they would have had to have waited for greater confirmation. So I wonder, in that case, what information would have stopped those riots? And I'm not sure any of it would.
Yeah. Sure, but I think one of the claims that really spread was this idea that Axel Rudibakana had arrived in the country as an illegal immigrant. Yep. I think rather than being someone, and I think that stuff, the fact that he came here as a child and had a different circumstances to the one that people were spreading around. I think that would have probably made a bit of a difference. As you say, there was a lot of anger, and it wasn't simply that case. It obviously was an expression of an anger that people had about a whole varied number of things, and that was the kind of the thing that made it boil over the top. So I agree with you, perhaps it wouldn't have stopped all of that kind of that anger, but I think it could have made a difference, I think, if we'd have had a bit more of an understanding. And I think also as well, it would have made people think that nothing was being withheld from them. I think that's why people get so angry a lot of the time, is this idea, this feeling they have that the authorities are withholding something from them for whatever reason. I think, as you often know in journalism, it's usually cock up rather than conspiracy, but it does allow for these things to take hold.
It does, but then I suppose the problem there, Alan, is that, how much information should we be entitled to? There is such a thing as protecting certain facts because of, court cases that will be happening in the future, and there's legal considerations. If you let something slip, a good defence lawyer will use that for the entirety of the case to somehow get their client off the hook or whatever it is. And I do wonder whether, are we asking almost too much now to say, what is it we really want? I mean, there's always been a case of, well, there's going to be a court case to settle this, and until that court case, it's nothing to do with anyone else.
Yeah, and we've got some pretty strict contempt of court rules.
Sure.
Obviously, you can get, and actually, because of social media, the previous administrations have told the CPS to come down much harder, I think, on comments made on social media, and we have seen a lot of convictions for contempt of court. I think because the government has acknowledged this, and so since the Southport thing, they've asked the Law Commission to look into doing a review of things like contempt of court with relation to social media, to see if there perhaps can be an altering of the guidelines, so I think people have a better understanding of what can and cannot be said, because I think sometimes more can be said, but there is a fear, as you say, of prejudicing a future trial, and I think sometimes more could be said, or there could be dispensation to say more in order to prevent this kind of situation from happening in the future. So we'll have to see whether that review comes to fruition. But clearly, social media and the weaponization of information is not going anywhere.
Indeed. British Steel, of course, huge story, not yet in any way settled. The Scunthorpe plant, the UK's last primary steel producer, really urgently needs raw materials to keep the furnaces running. And there lies the problem, because without the coking coal and the iron ore and all that goes with it, there could be a problem here. And of course, fingers are pointing all over the place, but number one on the accused list is the Chinese government.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think actually I spoke to an MP last week on Friday, when it was the government announced they were going to recall Parliament to pass this kind of emergency piece of legislation. And they were saying the thing was, when the government offered to buy the coking coal to keep the furnaces open, and that wasn't immediately accepted by Jingwei, this Chinese company, I think that's when the government sort of panicked and realised that actually this wasn't kind of, this was real level of brinksmanship, and this company were prepared to let the furnaces go out and therefore kind of bring to the end of production there entirely. So I think at that point they knew they had to really kind of get involved. And I think, yeah, it is, it takes something like 45 days sometimes to get this kind of coal. I think the minister this morning said there is some, I think, in a port in Lincolnshire if they can get it across. But the questions are being asked, why as a country can we not, if we're going to produce steel in this country, why do we not produce the coking coal to go into those steel plants? Lots of other countries like Germany and stuff who've made sort of transitions towards green energy still produce their own steel and are still able to keep production opening. And why in the UK have we allowed production to go to lots of foreign companies, not just Jingwei but Tata, and then these things then to be shut down, and we're on the brink. There's no guarantee now that even with this law change that we will see the Scunthorpe plant stay open.
Yeah, and I'm reading that we're, importing coal from Japan.
An emergency order from Japan.
I mean, really? Ed Miliband shoved a load of concrete down the holes that would ordinarily have produced some of this stuff. So maybe there's a problem there that we now have no facility to produce it. Ed Miliband, of course, features in our next story because he's been accused of having a carbon footprint 12, nearly 13 times higher than the average Brit, because he can't stay off aeroplanes, despite telling us to not take aeroplanes. He's been all over he can't stop himself, Ed. He's been in Brazil, New York, Beijing, 54.2 tonnes of CO2 emissions, courtesy of Ed Miliband, the man that's saving the planet.
Yeah, it's quite a funny story. It's a classic one of it. And any minister that rails against kind of air travel then is always pulled up that they're involved in it too. And I was kind of setting out to defend, I think, Ed Miliband for this because he needs to do a lot for his role. But I think the first trip he took was, like you say, it was all the way to Brazil to show the UK's commitment to climate stuff. I mean, presumably he could not have showed that commitment had he maybe done that sort of down the line through Zoom as we're doing now, rather than necessarily having to fly 7,000 miles to a country that's being kind of really harmed by a lot of climate change stuff. So yeah, I think sometimes it does seem a bit the hypocrisy is quite hard to kind of stave off. Normally I'd be quite supportive of ministers who have to go abroad to do their job, have to go to do stuff, but as you say, it's quite an amount for Fed to rack up.
And also now when it comes to sort of Zoom calls, ministers at very senior levels are not going to be, sat watching big speeches on an old Nokia. They'll be, they'll be on a massive screen, the kind of thing that Coldplay would have pinned up behind them. In glorious studio quality, nicely lit. It will look great, but you don't have to travel. And there's plenty of environmental voices that argue that very passionately, that consistent with their own views. I might not agree with them, but I get it, that's their view, that you just at the moment they're not taking flights, and you think the person that would be right at the top of the list of I don't go on aeroplanes anymore would be our own Ed Miliband.
Yeah, and I think people would say, oh, well, it's sort of signalling to do that. But that's the point. It sends a signal that you don't have to go to do these things kind of directly. I think, obviously, he would argue that it's not just about giving the speech, it's about speaking to people in person, having those conversations. They obviously take officials with them as well who talk to their counterparts. So there is a lot more to it than just giving that kind of speech. And I do understand that and I agree with that. But I do think that sometimes, you could make an example by saying, actually, I'm not going to fly 8,000 miles, wherever it is, to Brazil and back. And I think there is definitely a way of doing that. Sometimes, as you say, you're making that kind of that signal of intent. That you're going to put your money where your mouth is.
Spot on. And Sunak's former aide is among 15 charged with gambling offences. This is the former Tory MP Craig Williams. Some of us had to scratch our heads a little to remember Craig Williams, but he's been charged with gambling offences after betting on the 2024 general election date. And of course, he was an ex-aide to Rishi Sunak. I know this is all sort of ongoing legal stuff now, but it's I'm quite surprised we've seen this. I mean, isn't this something that's sort of only meant to happen in Sicily or Cuba?
Well, I was quite surprised, I think, because everyone sort of forgotten about this, really, because obviously they were charged. Well, not so charged. The investigation was begun in June during the election campaign. It was that kind of awful kind of final few weeks for Rishi Sunak, finding out that these people, there wasn't just him, it was another Conservative candidate were being investigated. But at the time, it was both by the police and by the Gambling Commission. And last August, the police said that they were not going to charge anyone. They were going to take no further action. They're investigating them for misconduct in a public office, and they thought that the high bar for that threshold had not been met. So I think everyone was sort of expecting that it might sort of go away, and then 8 months later the Gambling Commission say, well, we have continued our investigation and we now think that under the Gambling Act we think that these people can be charged. So yeah, I think it was a surprise that it kind of come. Yeah. Everyone thought this kind of died away, really.
Curious times. We'll watch with interest. Alan, thank you as ever. Alan Tolhurst is chief reporter at Politics Home. Thank you to him. This one comes in from Tim in Suffolk. What we all forget is that the UK's carbon footprint is generated by that produced in the UK, so importing all this stuff is not included in the UK's footprint. It's an easy win for Miliband. Crap for UK industry. Good point. Sean in Grimsby, the same people who say there's no two-tier policing are the same people who are saying we are smashing the gangs, we are putting money in your pockets, there's no cover-up of rape gangs, they cannot be trusted. One from Alan in Merseyside, the Home Office Committee says no evidence of two-tier policing, and Labour don't want a national inquiry into grooming gangs. Are they joking? It's a fair point. More on that coming up. 0344 499 1000. This is Talk.
The alternative is that we hadn't come in on Saturday to change legislation in Parliament, and the blast furnaces would therefore be closing. And if they closed, then we would be on the hook for north of £1 billion worth of costs as a result of land remediation and dealing with workforce issues and so on. The best way of us intervening is to make sure that we keep the blast furnaces going, because Jingye had been behaving irresponsibly in the last few days, saying they were going to accelerate the closure of the blast furnaces. We need to keep them going to help secure the future of steelmaking in the UK.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
21 minutes after 2 o'clock. Let's get a word from Claire in the Wirral on two-tier policing. Claire, good afternoon to you. What are your thoughts?
Good afternoon, Ian. This House of Commons two-tier report, nothing to see here. It's gaslighting us. Typical lying, liberal, scheming lefties. We've just had this sentencing council wanting two-tier justice. Hare Hill riots, police stood back. Southport riot, police took batons and dogs. No white police recruits needed for Yorkshire Police at the moment. Jewish guy who was arrested at a pro-Gaza demonstration.
For crossing the road?
With his, oh no, that was a different guy, I believe. But this guy was arrested because he had a pro-Israeli banner, surrounded by the pro-Gaza. No justice for the rape gang victims.
But is that? I mean, everything you've said is very powerful stuff. But is there a danger here of like putting a load of stuff together? And yes, there are some, there's some daft stories of some diversity people in certain areas who are making bizarre requests. But generally, I mean, is the whole thing orchestrated? I guess that's the point, Claire. Or is this just the weird world we live in where some people are doing some wacky stuff?
It's orchestrated. It's definitely orchestrated. It's just sort of...
But who would be orchestrating that?
Well, the powers that be,
Because this predates Starmer, right?
We've got... It does, actually, because the last government before that, believe it or not, were very much on the left. It's just the way that the world has gone. And actually, Ian, I have to disagree with you, talking about, on your take on a black guy driving a flashy car being stopped in a leafy suburb. Now, that's an old story. It might have happened 20 years, 10 years ago. But times have changed.
But that's true. But you've still got more young black guys in jail than you've got white guys, even as a proportion, and not all for knife crime is the accusation. I'm not suggesting that all of that is true. I'm making the point that members or spokespeople for that community will argue the same thing that you're arguing.
What do you mean?
They'll argue that there's a two-tier policing and it's against blacks and it's in favour of anyone but particularly young black kids.
No, not at all. And actually, it is two-tier.
No, but they will have the same passion as you've got.
Yeah, but I would actually say it is two-tier policing against blacks, but they don't realise it because a lot of these knife crimes that are going on the streets are black.
No, that is. But I was even if you park knife crime, you're still left with this. And by the way, this isn't actually my view because I could give you sit here for 20 minutes and give a flipping lecture on why these stats are as they are. My point is that those that are spokespeople for that community will passionately argue that two-tier policing exists and it's against black kids, mostly black kids.
Well, they can say that. They are from deprived areas. So I think if you're from a deprived area, whether you're a white kid or a black kid, there's a lot of truth in that. They are going to turn to crime. So, I think it's just sort of, there is more crime in with certain ethnicities, unfortunately.
But it's more about poverty than about your ethnicity.
Also, I think it's to do with like a gang thing very often now. There's a lot of gangs, like there are in America. We have gangs. But what I was going to say about the guy in the flashy car now, right? If he's seen by the police, they would stop him in his car and they'd take the knee. That's what the police would do with him now.
Yeah, we went through that era, didn't we? The taking the knee thing. I still find it extraordinary that ever became a bit of a thing. That people, even Keir Starmer and Angela Rayner, taking the flipping knee like a pair of loons. I mean, they actually did this, and they didn't do it in a quiet room somewhere. They were photographed doing it.
It's pretty bad, isn't it?
Well, they thought they were, that they were doing something. Being right on and decent people, and but little did they know they looked like a pair of buffoons.
Yeah, but also they were doing the two-tier thing because that's what they're into. So it's quite obvious. You don't do that. I mean, he's Prime Minister. He's supposed to be working for all of us, not for a minority.
Well, there it is. Yeah, well, I mean, but if you put it like that, that's absolutely fine, Claire. Thank you very much indeed for that passionate stuff. If you link it together and you look at some of the headlines, I just wonder whether this is what it was. Somebody earlier said, cock up, not conspiracy. There's a bit of that. The bit I am confused about when it comes to sort of these diversity initiatives, why there are so many around, and this, again, no defence of Starmer, this predates Starmer as well. We've been talking about this for flipping years. I'm just royally confused as how, you know, we've harmonised and things have got better, and obviously racism is still around. You know, there'll always be racism in the same way there'll always be robbery or assault. It's an offence, and some people do bad, horrible things, and you tackle it as best you can, and you call it out whenever you can, and you should do. Whether you can get rid of it fully, I'm not absolutely sure. But the idea that it's kind of, I think it's social media, isn't it? Because as racism has got worse because of social media, on the street, I don't sense, certainly if you look at arrest rates and what's going on there, but companies and corporations and institutions cannot, they're falling over themselves to hire someone to make them less racist, even though they're not at all racist. It's a bit bizarre. Georgina is down in London. On Ed Miliband, Georgina, what have you got for us?
No, don't even get me started, honestly, Ian. Good afternoon to you.
Afternoon.
Well, this is a prime example of this Labour two-tier politics that seems to be going hand over fist at every turn. Ed Miliband has one rule for himself and another rule for the rest of this country. This is an ideology that without cooperation from the likes of China wouldn't work anyway. And by the way, we're purchasing the net zero windmills and solar units from China.
From China,
Yeah, we're getting
buying it all over
by
there.
them.
Yeah.
Absolutely. We are guilty of 1% of the global carbon emissions here in Britain, which even as a layperson, I can say that isn't going to make a lot of difference in the grand scheme of things. It's costing this country an absolute fortune, and it's money, you know, that we could be better spent elsewhere. This government has got to realise that this is our money they are spending, and the people of this country need to realise that the government are public servants. The word servant is the key word here. We are the ones that pay their wages, Ian, and we are the ones that pay the bills of Britain, not the government, it's us. And the sooner we realise that and take a stand and say, do you know what, this is our cash and we don't want it spent this way, we want it spent better, keeping our borders safe, looking after our veterans, looking after our elderly, looking after our school children, looking after our hospitals. The sooner people realise this and throw away this stupid net zero ideology, the better this country will be.
Got it. Georgina, passionate stuff. And talking of net zero, over there in the States, an all-female rocket is about to take off. That'll be good for the environment, won't it? Because it's not stopping those guys. In 15 seconds' time, Katy Perry is on this flight. It's one of those flights that takes off. It lasts about 11 minutes from takeoff. The engines, the furnaces, whatever you want to call them, they are the engines, are on fire in the good way, and off it goes. It takes off. I think it's called a suborbital tour, which is where I think you get to see the kind of the arc of planet Earth from a huge distance of 100 kilometres. So 100 kilometres is the height that it will reach. Away it goes, successful takeoff into space. Flies up there, they have a little look around, they whip out their iPhones, take some pictures, and then come back down again. And then Katy Perry says, it's changed my life. And that's broadly what it is. Lauren Sanchez, who's Jeff Bezos' girlfriend, is also on that flight as well. A successful takeoff. It's been up there now for about 30 seconds, and then it comes back. 11 minutes in total, or thereabouts. That's the totality of the flight. I think this is similar, or maybe even identical, to the thing that... well, what was his name? Star Trek guy. William Shatner did. Name just lost me for a second. William Shatner did this and, said it was the most incredible thing ever. So Katy Perry, one of the all-female Spice Girls, the Space Girls, sorry, the space flight crew that are up there, and away they go. They'll be back in about 10 minutes now. It's a pretty swift trip. 100 kilometres, and smiles all round, it seems, on the ground after that successful launch. Oprah Winfrey is there as well, not in the rocket, sadly. She's in the crowd, cheering them all on. No doubt she'll make a documentary. I'm surprised Meghan Markle isn't in the rocket as well. That would have been great for her podcast, wouldn't it? We'll bring you details on that as it comes back to Earth, and I'm sure joyous applause all round from the billionaires that were allowed to take part. 0344 499 1000. This is Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
The world's gone absolutely nuts. Some really rich people have just taken off in a rocket. Oprah Winfrey's down there crying her flipping eyes out. I mean, this is not some... I don't know whether it's because it's an all-female flight, but they're not all female astronauts, and so what if they were? It's 2025, for God's sake. Katy Perry, I don't know what Oprah's like, beyond emotional, bawling her eyes out because a rocket took off by some very rich people who happen to have the funds to make it happen. This is really just a vanity thing. It cost an absolute arm and a leg for it to happen, and only those that are very rich could have been part of it. I'm assuming there are some proper kind of astronauty, piloty people on there as well in the crew, but it's all female, and I mean, is that a headline? Apparently so in the 21st century. Is that why Oprah was crying? Was she crying because her friend Katy Perry? I don't know that she's a friend of Katy Perry, but I'll tell you what. Oh, she's apparently a friend of Gayle King. Yeah. Is she the CNN person? CBS person, okay. So she's a friend of Gayle King. So Gayle's also gone up in a rocket as well. And Lauren Sanchez, Jeff Bezos' girlfriend, who's about 16 or something, she's gone up. And Katy Perry has gone up. And they're the sort of three, well, sort of A-listers. 0344 499 1000. Your observations, please, of the rocket. No, we don't want any calls on that. It's due back in about 8 minutes, by the way. It's a very swift flight. It takes you up there. I'm sure James May went up in something years ago on one of his own TV programmes where he flew high enough where you could get sort of the perspective of seeing the arc of planet Earth and the glow that comes from the planet. And I'd imagine that, by the way, I'd imagine that is quite game-changing to sort of see the planet from an angle you never ever see, ever, other than in books. It probably is incredible to witness and experience that. But so up they've gone. Oprah's in tears. I'm sure there's going to be some people, they'll be calling the paramedics to make sure Oprah's okay. But the last we heard, she is, which is great news. So when it lands, I'll tell you, it's landed. 0344 499 1000. This from Dion in Chelmsford. It says, we need to have a more concern about the victims of crime. We also need to worry about the perpetrators, 100%. They seem to get lost in the picture too often. Now, this is a belter, this one. Greater Manchester Police have been accused of a tick-box diversity scheme that recruits people with no exam results at all, not even a GCSE, or even a command of the English language. A whistleblower claims officers have been told to target Muslim areas and collect names, whether they're qualified or not, to join the police. Meanwhile, NHS trusts are using similar schemes to prioritise ethnic minority candidates for job interviews. Philip Kisley is Senior Fellow at the New Culture Forum. What is going on here, Philip? I mean, this seemed to me, when I first saw this story, and this is one that we uncovered here on Talk, I thought, well, maybe it's the coppers going, we're fed up with all this diversity thing, so we're just going to go out and do something, and it looks like we've ticked a box. So I couldn't quite work out whether the police were on the side of common sense or against common sense.
Yeah, it's a crazy story because also they were recruiting outside a supermarket. That's one of the things they were doing. They were just going up to random people who couldn't speak English, had no qualifications whatsoever, possibly were criminals, outside of a supermarket and saying, would you like to join the police force? This is one of several stories, actually, that have come to light over the last few days. West Yorkshire Police Force is another one who are doing pretty similar kinds of things. So, yes, this is about the representation game, isn't it? And this is about taking minority communities and saying, well, you're a minority community, therefore you should be massively overrepresented in the police force. And it's marginalising communities that by and large don't commit crimes, communities of people who actually pay most tax, people who are law-abiding, who take law and order seriously, and it's pushing those away. So this is what identity politics always does. It turns everything on its head. It brings stupidity into our lives. Now, just one thing here, Ian. If they want to play the inclusion game, the representation game, okay, let's do that. I'm happy to do that, but let's do it properly. Most representation goes to the least crime-ridden communities. I think that's what should happen. And those communities that do commit lots of crimes, if they get better, if they commit fewer crimes, then they can have more representation. I think that's fair enough and that's simple. If they want us to play the game, I don't want to do that, actually. I want people who don't commit crimes, who are law-abiding citizens, who take the country seriously, and they're good at their job. Give them the jobs, okay? But if they want to play this silly game, let's do it properly. Let's take them on, and let's show them how stupid this stuff is.
Yeah, it really is extraordinary. And looking at the NHS Trust using similar schemes to prioritise ethnic minority candidates for jobs, what is going on here, do you sense, Philip, in the minds of people who, and I make this example all the time. It's, at some point somebody walked into a meeting room and suggested this stuff. That's the bit that an actual human that looks like us went to work one day and said, I've got a great idea. Why don't we prioritise people from this background or that background or whatever? Now, representation is fine. The idea that it becomes a religion is not fine, and that's what I think is going on here.
It's very much, it's cultish behaviour. I think you've just really put your finger on the button there, Ian. The other thing is that these people live in absolute tiny little silos where everybody else thinks exactly the same thing, and this ideas proliferate and proliferate and proliferate because no one's saying, whoa, hang on, stop, this is silly. This is silly. That doesn't happen, okay? So you go one after another, after another, after another. I've seen this so often in meetings. I worked in higher education for over 25 years. Everybody thinking the same thing, and everybody actually focused on themselves and thinking about how good they look and how virtuous they are and how cutting edge they are and how out there they are. It's all of those things. All of these things come together. There's a sense of naivety and silliness that holds it all together. And it's actually really frightening for the rest of us, because if you think about what's happening in the NHS, waiting lists are massive. Satisfaction is in the toilet. No one's satisfied with the NHS. There are blunders galore. It's the same thing with the police service. Now, I'm in West Yorkshire at the moment, okay? The really big problem, if you're talking about societal ills and you're talking about racism and they're trying to make an anti-racist force, if you're talking about racism, the big problem here is anti-Semitism. Nobody deals with that, and the police service don't want to know about that because anti-Semitism tends to come from one community, and that's the community they're trying to appease.
It's a bit more than just an upside-down, topsy-turvy blip, though, isn't it? Because we've been talking about this for some time, and, you know, organisations and journalists are better at winkling out these stories, which perhaps previously would have gone maybe unnoticed. We have talked about it, having said that. But now as race relations and all those things about equality, whether it's women in the workplace, whether it's diversity on TV, all of that stuff is not fully addressed, but largely addressed, I would say. As things have got better, these schemes seem to accelerate.
It's strange because I think, well, you'll remember this. I think about 20 years ago, we got to a really good point where we weren't really thinking about race that much. It was probably a bit more than 20 years ago. We were just trying to be as colourblind as we could possibly be. Okay. Now, it didn't always work, but we really tried. And that was the aim. That was the emphasis. We just get people right for the job. We want a society that isn't based around racial hierarchies, any of that stuff. And everybody was pretty happy, actually. If you look at all of the Gallup polls and the research from that time, most people were generally okay. You know, the society was functioning okay. Then all of a sudden identity politics kicked in and all of this liberal nonsense that separates people in terms of race and in terms of hierarchy and all of that kind of thing. All of that stuff kicked in, and then all of a sudden it just went chaotic, it just went stupid. And it's round about this time that we get back to these stories, the NHS, the police service, the institutions, education. It all starts falling apart because people are not interested in actually what they're doing, what the institutions and the jobs are for. All they're interested in is the colour of people's skin. And to me, that's really frightening. This is we've become a stupid society, and we need to do something about it. We need to push back. And like I say, if we're going to talk about representation, let's talk about representation in terms of who's doing the good things, who's not breaking the law, who's paying tax. Let's put those people first.
Yeah, spot on. Listen, Philip, it's always very thorough stuff from you, sir. Thank you very much for joining us, Philip Kisley, Senior Fellow at the New Culture Forum. It is it's just a sort of bonkers existence that we've arrived in. There was that, you know, Westminster Council down in London, which once upon a time, was it Dame Shirley Porter used to run that thing. It was really seen as almost about as archetypal Tory as it could get, and it's gone full swing the other way. I think one of the fellas, or the fella that's running it, South African, says he's, you know, utilised his experience of witnessing apartheid in order to, I'm slightly paraphrasing here, so I mean no offence to the man concerned, other than I hope I'm reporting this factually. His experience of knowing what apartheid looks like informs the way that he recruits. Right, this is not South Africa in 1983. This is the United Kingdom, London, by the way, one of the most diverse cities on the planet, in 2025. But these characters will be informed by that. They think they're in that kind of perpetual battle of iniquity, and they can't get out of bed in the morning unless they can fight one of these little wars, constantly looking for the next one as each one gets solved. And solution plays no part in the minds of these people. They have to continually search for the injustice. Where's the next? There must be one. Oh my God, look, there's an injustice here. There's 5 white people working in a flipping office in Westminster. How could that possibly be? We need to get some other people in there. Yeah, but you might have 5 black people in the office next door, or 5 brown people. It doesn't matter, right? Get the right people for the job. A meritocracy is the only thing that has served the human journey well, demonstrably, over many, many years. This one in from Mega Vegan, who says, how about Starmer compromising the court case against Southport rioters by calling them all far-right thugs? That was a little bit of an iffy moment, wasn't it? Legally speaking. Cliff in Berkshire, judges by definition have to judge and pass sentence taking into account both aggravating and mitigating factors. If we want more rigidity in sentences, and I'm sure I do, then we should advocate to replace human judges with machines or perhaps AI. Too many judges appear not to be impartial. And, you know, if you want to have that debate rigorously, I think we'd all have to acknowledge it sort of depends where you sit politically, depending on how you view this. I mean, when we saw the Just Stop Oil people, I'll fess up on this as well, getting jailed for 4 or 5 years, it was like, yeah, absolutely right. They were gluing their backsides to the motorway or standing on gantries. They were causing a right old scene. You can't stop major motorways because of your own pet cause, no matter how invested you might be, no matter how passionate you might feel it, protest can't work like that. There's got to be a compromise in protest. And these guys took it too far. But then they were jailed for 4 or 5 years. And we were all going, yeah, about time too. 5 years in the chiller. But if somebody is jailed for a lengthy period of time and it's something we have a different view on, it's in all of us to go, well, that's outrageous. Well, other people will go, no, that's perfectly right. That's perfectly right. They didn't like the Just Stop Oil ones, but they like these ones. So we all have to be a bit honest here and go, there's a little bit about wherever you sit on the political scale or spectrum will define what you believe or what you see. 0344 499 1000. If you are a big fan of Katy Perry, I can bring you the good news that she has returned from space. If you are not a fan of Katy Perry, I can bring you the bad news that she's returned from space. She wasn't abducted by aliens along the way, nothing like that. They've all returned safely. It was a very swift visit. I don't know, would you have time to whip out your iPhone 16 Pro Max when you're up there and get an accurate? I'd imagine it's fairly shaky up there trying to get a picture. I'm sure we'll see all the shots at some point. 0344 499 1000. This is Talk.
The alternative is that we hadn't come in on Saturday to change legislation in Parliament, and the blast furnaces would therefore be closing. And if they had closed, then we would be on the hook for north of £1 billion worth of costs as a result of land remediation and dealing with workforce issues and so on. The best way of us intervening is to make sure that we keep the blast furnaces going, because Jingye had been behaving irresponsibly in the last few days, saying they were going to accelerate the closure of the blast furnaces. We need to keep them going to help secure the future of steel making in the UK.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
It's 10 to 3 right here on Talk. Let's get some calls from you. Richard, down in London. What have you got for us, Richard? Hi.
Hi, Ian. I mean, it's difficult to know where to start, but I mean,
There are just two things that have occurred to me in the last few months, really, since Southport. First, this country, there's a culture of denial in this country, and I think people outside the country can see it better than we can. But it's very, very clear that we need an inquiry or whatever. We need to think seriously about the problem of integration in this country.
Yeah.
Because if you look at the most serious atrocities of the last 20 years, from 7/7 to the murder of Lee Rigby, to the Manchester bombings, to what happened in Southport last year, they're perpetrated either by migrants or by people of migrant heritage. So we clearly have a problem with what people call integration or assimilation, and it beggars belief that we're not talking about this. But we're not talking about this, Ian, for a very clear reason. What you could say, the woke establishment who are in power in this country, don't want us to talk about it because only 15, 20 years ago, it was clear that they were actually using immigration to rub the noses of the right in diversity. So, if you like, it's possible to say that our social problems were caused by the left in power. They actually wanted to increase immigration. They didn't care about the integration problems. So, Ian, this is incredibly serious. And my second point is, I mean, if you look at social media, it can't have escaped your notice that there are lots of English people saying, "I'm leaving. I'm not free to say what I want to say." Now, Ian, in a few weeks' time, we're going to be celebrating VE Day, and I've got to say to you, mate, people are going to be thinking, well, what was the point? Because I just give you one last comparison. The Japanese lost the war, but they didn't lose their country, okay? The British were on the winning side in the war, but arguably we've lost both. Our country's been transformed. And things like Southport or 7/7 never used to happen, Ian. They simply never used to happen. And we've been conditioned to accept them for some reason.
We've had. I mean, it would be fair to say in this context.
Nothing like 7/7. Nothing. I mean,
no, we'd never had suicide bombing on our soil. I think I'm right in saying, and there's no doubt about that. Do you think the reason, though, that there is a kind of call for context is that 99.9% of people of that faith would not endorse 7/7? So you have to be, as a country, as a prime minister, as a head of police, you've got to be really careful that you keep a lid on, and I don't mean a lid of silence, I mean a lid of kind of context on what has happened. At the moment, we have an Islamist threat to the Western world. We've previously had other threats. At the moment, that's the one we have. If we put it out there that this is all because of immigration, that threat goes to a riot.
Well, no, because that would be simplistic. I mean, there would be questions that, but it isn't. The point is, it isn't just one demographic. I mean, the other chap you talked to about stop and search. He refers to the fact that people from one demographic are more likely to be stopped and searched. But in July 2020, Ian, Cressida Dick, who was the Met Commissioner, was asked about stop and search and why it was on
a select committee as well, wasn't it?
Yes, and she said that one demographic is 4 times more likely to be a victim of murder, and 8 times, Ian, 8 times more likely to be a perpetrator. Now, I just ask you, how long can British society just kind of keep this covered up?
But I don't know whether, I mean, I think that you're right to raise it, because I've raised that particular stat a number of times and it doesn't seem to go anywhere. And if Cressida Dick, the head of the police at the time, can raise it and it doesn't go anywhere, you have to wonder. Listen, I've got to move for no other reason, Richard, than we're about to hit the clock. Thank you for that. Don't go away, Robert, in Hertfordshire, with you as soon as possible. We've got the Voice of Doom, by the way. Is it day 11? Is this day 11, Amy? Day 11 of the Voice of Doom. It's the mystery voice with a political angle to it. Could be a politician, could be somebody connected to politics, but nobody thus far has got it right. Who is this?
Political decisions were taken.
Don't phone in, but you can message 87222 if you want to take part. It's up to you. Here it is again.
Political decisions were taken.
In the 11th day, and no one has... Sounds quite biblical, doesn't it? On the 11th day, we still didn't have a winner. Can we get one today? If somebody gets it correct, we'll give you the answer on the other side of the news. If they don't, it rolls over again. And we're on a 4-day week this week, so it's going to be, you know, we've got to get this thing sorted before Easter. Here's the voice again.
Political decisions were taken.
There it is. Let's go to Robert in Hertfordshire. Robert, we haven't got long, but I'm sure you can do it. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. You've put me off my thread now. You was talking to that last guy, and he was talking about 9/11. You said, yeah, we don't have suicide bombers here. Yes, we do. Yes, we do. We've had suicide bombers here. I mean, if you want me to, I'll go through the figures. You know, we've had, we've had, was it 9/11, 7/11?
No.
We've had...
That was a shot. 7/7, we had suicide bombers. That's what he was referring to. And that's what I said.
Oh, right. Well, we've had suicide.
Yeah, that's what you're saying. We never had suicide bombers before that was the point.
No, we haven't. Yeah. You know, but the thing is, we can keep saying it all the time, but until we get rid of the politically motivated lawyers and judges, we will never solve any problem. It's all right saying Nigel Farage get in, but he won't be able to do anything until we come out of the European Court of Human Rights, which no one seems to do. And I remember Cameron having that on his manifesto many years ago. And I voted for the Tories because that was number one on his manifesto. We're going to come out of the European Court of Human Rights.
David Cameron said that?
Cameron said that.
No way.
Honestly. Well, it stuck in my mind.
Well, yeah, Cameron, you know, the last time I looked, he's very much a supporter of it, but, you know, who knows what politicians say to get him...
I'm not going to argue with you.
No, I'm not going to argue with you, Robert. You're a wise man, I know that. Listen, I've got to stop it there because we hit the clock. Thank you. That's Robert in Hertfordshire. 03444 499 1000 is where you will find us. Lots to come in the next session. We continue to take your calls. Two-tier policing, fact or fiction? Do we define it by anecdotes? Do we define it as stats? However you want to look at it, your thoughts on that. What's going on with Scunthorpe? Still more comments there as well. Plus, the voice of doom, day 11. Can we get a winner? It's a simple task. Can you tell us who this is?
Political decisions were taken.
87222. Remember, don't phone in because we ain't got any prizes at this end, but you can take part on 87222. If we get a right answer, we will reveal all on the other side of the news at 3, which is next.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
It is indeed the Afternoon Empire. Good afternoon. Welcome to the home of common sense. So MPs say there's no evidence of two-tier policing, specifically referring to the riots in Southport last summer. They called the police response entirely appropriate, but have slammed prosecutors for making officers' jobs harder by letting fake news spread. There was absolutely an issue around that, wasn't there? We'll have more on that from you. And two-tier policing, fact or fiction as far as you're concerned. Also this afternoon, Energy Secretary Ed Miliband's net zero plans are being blamed for pushing British steel to the edge, with Scunthorpe's plant scrambling for raw materials to keep the furnaces going, for God's sake. I mean, really? Really, we can't keep the furnaces going? You can't turn the lights on. And a mother was banned from the playground by her daughter's primary school after complaining that kids as young as 9 were having their transgender identity affirmed by teachers. Oh, for God's sake. It's another one of those, everybody. Everything you need to know, all the breaking news right here on Talk 0344 499 1000. Before we get back to it, the voice of doom. Have we got, on the 11th day, have we got a winner to what is, without doubt, now radio's most compelling and addictive and sought after? I wouldn't call it a quiz, I'd call it a challenge, frankly. The world is talking about this now. Usually these go on average, for about 2 days. This is now day 11 of this mystery voice, and so far nobody had been, well, up until today, nobody had been able to tell us who this is.
Political decisions were taken.
So has today change things? Some of the answers we've got: David Steele, it is not Alistair Campbell, Michael Ellis, Arthur Scargill, Robin Cook, Chris Whitty, no, it is not Damien Green, nor is it Seb Coe. David Cameron, no, David Cameron comes up every day, almost no matter what the voice. It is not John McDonnell, it is not. And guess what? We still don't have a winner. So tomorrow, day 12. The record, by the way, on the Voice of Doom is 14 days. It took 14 days to identify Louise Casey. How long will it take to identify this one? Let's have another listen.
Political decisions were taken.
Tomorrow, about 2:45, it returns. Be prepared, do your research, and stand by for some flipping fireworks. So, Energy Secretary Ed Miliband's net zero policies are being blamed for British Steel's struggles to stay afloat. MPs cut short their holiday, of course, to pass emergency laws so that the government can take over the Scunthorpe plant from its Chinese owners, Jingai. The plant could shut down if enough raw materials aren't found soon to keep its furnaces running. Let's speak with Andrew Tettenborn, writer and academic. Extraordinary, really, Andrew. I was just saying a second ago, the old phrase, we can't keep the lights on. I mean, the idea we haven't got enough stuff in order to get a furnace going is laughable.
Well, I'd have thought it was, I must admit. The thing is, the government had to do what it did in recalling MPs. There's no doubt about that. But apart from that, it deserves absolutely no kudos at all.
Yeah.
It's rather like the person, the lifeguard who claims the prize for rescuing the person that a couple of minutes ago he pushed into the water. Ever since we had the general election, the government have known perfectly well that they're living on borrowed time as regards the steel industry. If you go back to last September, don't know if you remember, you had the problems over Port Talbot. The government were warned then, and there was an emergency question placed, I think, by Richard Tice of Reform. Are the government aware that net zero is essentially killing our steel industry?
Yep.
They got fobbed off. And so they came up and then discovered that Jingai wanted to effectively close down Scunthorpe. This, as far as I can see, is very much down to the government. It's happened on their watch. It's not that the Labour Party is the only party to blame. if you look at net zero, Theresa May was absolutely in favour of it, so was Boris. And you have to remember, who was it who sold the steelworks to Jingye, coming from a country which most certainly doesn't have our interests at heart? The answer, of course, is one Boris Johnson. But the Labour Party could have done something about this a great deal earlier and didn't.
Yeah. Why didn't they? Is it because to start for the Labour Party, particularly with Ed Miliband knocking around within it, is it, do you sense that just even to talk about coal and steel are sort of dirty words in the among the cool kids over there at Labour HQ? Is it as simple as that?
I'm afraid to some extent, I think it is. The one point that Labour doesn't want anyone to start talking about is this. You can have a sea green, incorruptible commitment to net zero, or you can have a competitive steel industry. You can't have both.
Yeah.
What the government has tried to do is use honeyed words and say, oh, well, we're going to have all this green steel, and green steel is what the world demands. Which doesn't alter the fact that it is, I think, very largely net zero, which has made British steel uncompetitive to start with. And green steel itself, of course, has its problems. If you look at the Minister of State, Sarah Jones, saying, oh, well, going over to this green steel is essential because it's what the market demands, that also is pretty disingenuous.
Yeah.
People who use steel want steel. OK, they'll say through their PR people we're desperate for green steel, but when push comes to shove, what they want is steel coils or whatever it is.
And it comes to something, doesn't it, when we have to phone up the Japanese and say, can we buy some coal? I mean, the idea that we can't, we don't have this stuff or no ability to get this stuff is extraordinary.
Well, of course, stand up the man who was dead in favour of putting the kibosh on the Cumbrian coal mine.
Yeah. Spot on.
I won't name him because we all know who he is.
Absolutely. And these were the arguments that were around then, which were completely ignored. In fact, they were obliterated. They were seen as, almost, old-fashioned, not even on board with the new world we're in. Get with it, guys. We don't need that kind of stuff anymore. And yet here we have the same government. And you rightly gave the lifeguard kind of analogy at the beginning. The government talking big on saving British industry, and having literally nothing in the storeroom to do it with.
Well, quite. Also, you've got to remember that calling for green steel making using electric arc furnaces isn't necessarily the whole answer, because this country needs strategically the ability to make steel.
Yeah.
And electric arc furnaces can only produce steel from scrap or pig iron. They can't produce it from iron ore. So, even at on the best scenario, with green steel made with all these windmills nicely revolving in the North Sea, we would still have been hamstrung in our ability to make our own steel. And that's something else which doesn't tend to be pointed out.
Yeah. What do you sense, or where do you think we'll be, I don't know, a year down the line, Andrew, with Scunthorpe?
I think Scunthorpe will be kept going. It'll be kept going with massive subsidies for the moment. The person keeping it going will most certainly not be Ed Miliband. The on-dit is that the knives are out, always were out for Ed Miliband. I wouldn't insure his political life for a great deal. I have a feeling that a lot of this government's net zero policy is itself in tatters. Mm-hmm. It's already rode back on net zero as regards cars and vans. If you want to make a little bit of money at William Hill, I'd suggest you go and put it on the government rowing further back on other aspects of net zero.
100%. Yeah, I think that is certainly the direction of travel. You wonder also, Andrew, just as a kind of PS point to all of this, what does it take for Ed Miliband to resign? Because whilst I profoundly disagree with him, I would have thought that anyone in his position, I mean, Heathrow would have been enough for you to go. Factor in Luton to that, you might have think that would have been the final straw. Oil fields still being looked at, and then now this, you might have thought he'd have walked the plank by now.
Well, yeah. The point is, you've got to look at internal Labour politics here. Ed Miliband is absolutely convinced that he is right. You've also got to remember that he's very popular with the left wing of the party.
Yep.
And Keir Starmer has to keep the left wing on side, which means he has to think twice before sacking the man. I have a feeling he will think twice and he will do it this time, but that's probably why he's hesitated to do so up until now.
Yeah. And that may be, you know, as Mr. Starmer sees it, his only chance of being seen as, well, maybe the final divorce from the Corbyn sort of wing of the party. Yes. I know Miliband suggested he wasn't that, but he clearly was a bit.
No, I think that's right. It's only my speculation. I don't have a spy in Downing Street, but I think it's a fair inference that that's what's being thought at the moment.
100%. Andrew, great to have you on again. Thank you. Andrew Tettenborn, writer and academic, with us on the programme with what is going on in Scunthorpe, the government's response. Do we nationalise, go for the whole hog, try and find a way of making some coal, coking coal, so we can get this steel thing running? Would it be enough anyway to have a meaningful... I mean, I wish I knew more about this. I mean, I read enough about it, but, you know, if you're at the coalface, no pun, yourself, and this is a field or an area you know really well, could we theoretically get a bit of an industry up and running here that was meaningful? I'm not talking about making a little bit here, a little bit there, that was kind of, it was neutral or made a few losses, something that was a powerhouse in steel production, and get back to that. Or is that gone? Are those days now gone? I'd like to think not. We're just sort of told by the good and the great that they are gone, but they can't be. Jane in Liverpool says, I enjoyed listening to Douglas Murray this morning talking to Julia, so much so I ordered his book on democracies and death cults to be delivered tomorrow. I regularly order books of all genres and content from Amazon. However, today when I got confirmation of my order, imagine my surprise when the image of the book cover was blanked out with an explanation of item hidden for privacy. Whose privacy? I'm an intelligent adult who's able to make informed decisions on what I choose to read and do not need a faceless organisation to be concerned about my reading choices and privacy. Privacy from what I do not understand, says Jane. Do you remember Amazon went through a little period of... do you remember this, Adam, when they stopped putting the item on the email that you just ordered? And if you had a few items that you'd ordered, you couldn't find which one without checking the order number. And they've kind of gone back now. Maybe they've gone back again. And that was more about other companies, I think, phishing into your kind of internet details or phishing into Amazon's and finding info about you. Or was it something else? Was it because it was Douglas Murray? Jane, thank you very much indeed for that. Let's talk to Matt in Cheshire. What have you got for us, Matt? Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Ian. We will know whether two-tier policing is a real thing at the end of Labour's term if we look at the prison population when they leave office. I think at the moment the black population of Britain is 4 to 5%. The prison population is 8%. The Muslim population is 8.5%, and I think the prison population is 15%. So I think with Keir Starmer's obsession with far-right narratives, he needs to equalise the prison population, which means finding ways to put more white people in prison.
There is this curious phrase, isn't there? You might be familiar with it, Matt, of equality of outcomes rather than equality of, criminal investigation, where we all want equality, but equality of outcomes. What the hell does that mean?
that's the equity in DEI, isn't it?
Yeah, unbelievable. We want all the outcomes to be equal among all different groups, regardless of whether one group is more prone to a particular crime than another. And you know what? I can explain. I think particularly young black kids, and that whole argument, which is, and I feel quite strongly about this, about the whole working class element. I think a lot of what is called racism is actually classism. I think there's an issue of poverty. I think there's all manner of strands to that argument. The disproportionate amount of Muslims in jail, I can't work that out. I can't fathom the same arguments there. I don't know why that is, but the idea that somebody high up in government isn't looking at it is tragic.
I think a lot of this started with COVID and George Floyd, and Labour is still in that mindset.
100%.
The rest of the world has moved on.
Yeah.
Labour are totally obsessed with identity politics still.
Yeah.
And even the Democrats have learned that is the road to sort of being crushed to death. But this government is so insane, they would rather harm the British public and insult them to the faces.
Who was it? There was a girl, what's her name? Female commentator, Ash Sarkar, you know the one I mean?
I do, yeah.
She often pops up with, sort of left-wing kind of views on things, and, which is fine. I mean, that's her politics, and it's a democracy and stuff. But I think she said recently on a podcast that, this idea of the whole kind of political correct thing and all of that has sort of had its day, really. I'm slightly misquoting her there, but that's broadly what I think she was saying. So there are some that get it.
She's written a book, more or less, saying, oh my God, I was so childish. What on earth was I thinking?
Yeah, good for her.
I've been indoctrinated. And now she's in her 30s. She's realised that...
Yeah, she's got a bit more responsibility on her hands. Maybe looking at buying a house, I don't know. You're right. The reality suddenly hits you, doesn't it? Great call, Matt. Thank you very much indeed for that. 0344 499 1000. Vince says, your guest, Andrew Tettenborn, is wrong on the issue with British Steel starting in the 1979s. Well, should that be the 1970s, with all the Labour strikes, when the Labour government closed coal mines and promised stupid pay rises to unions. They in turn hit all the UK industry as the vehicle industry destroyed, the steel industry destroyed and sold off in part or closed down across the UK. The steel industry never recovered because there was a lot of interdependency as well between those industries. But you're right, I mean, there was the loss making and the union control was kind of off the scale. And for those that have followed what happened with the miners' strike and all of that, there is a good Netflix documentary about, I've forgotten what it's called, but it's another, not so much another, very much the human angle of the miners' strike from those that were involved in it, what they experienced as individuals, as fathers, mostly fathers, and as communities. And you look at that and it's heartbreaking. I mean, a lot of it is heartbreaking. And I always thought that the Thatcher government, I know why they needed to do what they needed to do. I thought some of the methods behind it were absolutely not the right way to deal with something as seismic as the mining community and not just entire, I mean, there were entire estates where literally everyone worked or directly or indirectly in the mines. And that just disappeared. And you imagine the whole housing estate. Nobody has got a job anymore and no chance of getting one because nothing else happens in that city. That was just not... it's the usual thing that happened in the, Afghanistan and Iraq and, no end plan, no end game, as it were. 0344 499 1000. Bit of breaking news coming out of Birmingham where the bags are towering high. They might just get a little higher. Refuse workers in Birmingham voted overwhelmingly to reject a deal aimed at ending the long-running strike. This is according to Unite, the trade union. So it rumbles on. The rats get bigger, the piles of rubbish get bigger, the problem gets bigger. Welcome to the 21st century, kids, under a Labour government. 0344 499 1000. This is Talk.
Before July last year, before the general election, we had some advanced negotiations with this company to put considerably more investment into the UK, into the transition to electric arc furnaces. And we think that the government dropped the ball when they came in July. They had no plan. When we asked them about this in the Commons, they would just say they were developing a steel strategy. And what we can see is that they've dropped the ball in these negotiations.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
It is Talk. 24 minutes after 3. Let's go to Chris in Epsom. How you doing, Chris?
Hi, Ian. How are you, mate?
I'm good, thank you. What are your thoughts?
Look, I don't know who was on this committee of MPs, but it's what they've come up with is absolute rubbish.
Yeah.
Obviously, there's two-tier policing. Everybody goes on about what happened at. I always get this wrong. Is it Stockport?
Southport.
Southport. You see, I did it again. Southport. I think it's a Freudian slip. It's a Southport. But just was it 10 days, 2 weeks before that? They had the one in Manchester with the mainly Romanis. And the police left the area for 5 hours and just let them riot.
What the defence that the police answer is they had literally no notice that anything was going to kick off, so they had nothing. They can't just get a riot unit when they fancy it. That was the answer to that.
Absolute rubbish.
Well, they didn't have the opportunity to get the gear you need because it happened very quickly.
No, they don't, Ian. That's absolute rubbish. They have it on standby.
Yeah, well, that's
what do you think they're going to do every time there's a riot? Oh, can you wait 24 hours?
Well, a riot usually comes on the back of a protest. That's the point. And not every police station has riot gear. I know that much.
Right.
Not to that level, anyway.
Let's leave that to one side.
Yeah, of course.
Let's move to the example of the Metropolitan Police cordoning off an area on Tower Bridge, and then allowing Islamic prayer call to be made through amplified speakers across the 1,000-year castle at the Tower of London. All right? That's perfectly fine. That's a call to prayer. On the same hand, and it's quite interesting because he's a black guy preaching the gospel, and they told him that he's got to stop because it might offend somebody.
Was that the one outside Buckingham Palace at the weekend?
Yeah. I mean,
how do you get arrested for reading a Bible?
Oh, Ian,
I mean, seriously, if you were to stand in the doorway of a mosque and start reading the Bible, I kind of half get that you might be up to no good, right? You're deliberately trying to inflame something. I get that.
I'll give you that.
But even that, to be honest, would just take a word from the old Bill, wouldn't it? Like, mate, we know you're here to stir it up, clear off, go home. That's what you'd do. But standing outside the palace?
There's another example of that. Flick it the other way. Why do the Palestinian marchers always want to go past a Jewish synagogue on a Saturday? Why do their marchers always want to go?
I didn't know they did. I didn't know that.
Yes, of the synagogue up near the BBC. It's ridiculous. It is, and do you know what the police told the Jewish faith to do?
Go on.
They said, well, perhaps it's better you don't go and pray on Saturday then. Seriously. This is the country that I used to.
So you don't pray on Saturday? Is that what they said?
Yeah, don't go and pray on Saturday.
I didn't know about that.
Yeah, mate, this is a country that I used to wear the uniform to protect. I no longer recognise it.
Yeah. It's kind of. What do you do, however, right? I mean, the question, I suppose, Chris, if we wanted to really debate this, thrash it out properly, it'd probably take us a few weeks, and we'd have to hire an impressive meeting room somewhere, hopefully with lots of kegs of ale.
I'd rather have lunch with you at Langham's and discuss it.
Langham's would be even better. There's nothing wrong with that. But if you have a society that, for whatever reason, good or bad, no matter where people sit on this, that becomes multiracial, say, rather than multicultural. So you've got different people. It was never the case before, but it is now. How do you deal with that? What is the answer?
Well, we're slipping away from it, but this goes into the wider issue.
Yeah.
Justice is blind and balanced. Unfortunately, the left-wing twits have got hold of the educational department, they've got hold of the police, they've got hold of our NGOs, they're now influencing everything that comes into our life, and affects our life. And that's where the slide is. And it really, but it's not just the Labour Party now. I mean, we widen it out to the furnace.
Yeah.
That's down to the Tories. That was Kwasi Kwarteng and Boris Johnson that let the Chinese in, who were playing the long game. They probably knew they were playing the long game, but they didn't reckon on the global instability that we've got now, where we need virgin steel for construction and armament.
Well, you're looking for logic and sense in politicians here, Chris, and you know that's a foolish journey to go on. You know, the idea that they might think ahead, perish the thought. Chris, I've got to move. Thank you, Chris in Epsom. On the back of that, Gary says, if there is a defence of Boris Johnson's decision to sell British steel to China in 2020, it is that at the time, the Chinese were the only bidders for what was a failing company that was about to go to the wall. It could have been rescued by the government, because even though we had left the EU, we were still bound by Brexit transition rules. It couldn't have been rescued by the government. We were bound by Brexit transition rules, and so still signed up to EU competition laws. It is ironic, of course, that many of the Labour MPs who stood up in Parliament on Saturday calling for British Steel to be rescued with state money and even for it to be nationalised are some of the ones who argued to keep us in the EU, fought to overturn the Brexit vote, and are still of the opinion that we should still be in the European Union and still signed up to those competition laws. You couldn't make it up. Thank you, Gary. 0344 499 1000. More to come right here on Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
It is Talk. 0344 499 1000. Just gone 3:30. Lots to talk about here. The mother banned from daughter's primary school for complaining about trans identity lessons. Goodness me. Women's rights to be prioritised in equality law revamp. Yeah, absolutely. That's exactly what we need to be talking about. Fiona McAnella is Director of Campaigns at Sex Matters. Good afternoon, Fiona.
Good afternoon.
I mean, you'd think by now we'd all learnt, you know, whatever you do not at any point raise your head above the parapet of the gender madness, because it's only going to end in tears. And here's another example of the insanity that we're dealing with. Karina Conway, a woman banned from her kids' school playground after criticising how gender issues were taught to pupils. Firstly, it throws up why are gender issues being taught to pupils? And secondly, what kind of system are we working in when a mum can't raise this without getting banned from picking her kid up?
Yeah, and I'm not sure there's any other subject where the reaction would be quite so ferocious against a parent who dares to question what's being taught. As you say, anyone who puts their head above the parapet gets their head chopped off. And you know, we had hoped that we were getting near the end of no debate now. That was a tactic that worked for years to keep people in line so that children could be taught that they could change sex and that you had to play along if Mr. came back as Miss at school and all of that. I think this mother's been brave, but she's just saying what most people believe, which is that sex is real. When it matters, it really matters. And she should be able to say that. And, you know, it's good that she's getting some publicity for this. I hope that it will embolden other parents to challenge rather than cow them, which is what the school would have hoped.
Well, you'd think so. And again, on the back of a story a couple of weeks ago where a couple of parents were banned from their kids' school because they'd said some stuff on WhatsApp that the school didn't like very much, which ended up in a raid on their house by the police, etc. You might think schools now would be going, you know, look, the madness is over. Let's have some perspective on this. The school even admitted they acknowledged factual errors in the way it was teaching this area as well. I mean, Lord knows what poor old Karina Conway must have done to upset the head teacher or the governors.
Yeah, I don't think that teachers are demonstrating the kind of resilience that, you know, we would expect from them. You know, if someone criticizes your school, you engage with that. You don't ban the person who said it. And as you say, that's what happened to those parents recently. And apparently in this school, they said that Karina Conway basically made them feel nervous. That when she interacted with them, it made them nervous. Now, I don't know what her style was, but a parent has to be able to question what their children are being taught. And we know that there is real danger in children being taught that someone can be born in the wrong body or that someone can change sex. And in fact, it's completely counter to teaching guidelines to reinforce sex stereotypes. And yet that's what they're doing when they tell children that, you know, perhaps a boy is really a girl. So we really need to get a handle on this, and we need the government to get a handle on it. You know, we're still waiting for guidance, clearer guidance to come out on this.
Well, indeed, and they were wrong. They taught kids, apparently, that transgender identity is a protected characteristic, which is not the case. It's gender reassignment that the Equality Act covers. And, of course, Conway had a protest outside the school. Kelly J. Keane, a name very familiar in this area, had been there, prompting teachers to call the police over the demonstration. I mean, really?
Well, it's completely inappropriate to be teaching that kind of stuff to primary school children. I mean, really, they haven't been taught the basics of sex yet. So why is anyone teaching them about gender reassignment or transgender identity or the Equality Act? You know, teaching children to be tolerant and children are naturally curious, teaching them to be open-minded and to learn. That's the job that should go on in primary schools, not these lectures that are really just indoctrinating them. So I think she's absolutely right to be challenging this. And if the school doesn't like the consequences, they need to deal with their own issues first rather than use the police to try and shut it all down.
100%. But is there some light at the end of this rather strange, questionable, dubious tunnel? The government considering changes to the equality laws to protect women-only spaces and clarify the distinction between biological sex and gender identity. Is that the sort of thing you've been waiting for, Fiona?
Well, there are two big things going on here. So the Equality and Human Rights Commission has been working on a revised code of practice that is the interpretation of the Equality Act as it stands. That is expected to be put before Parliament in the coming months. We don't know what's in it. We saw a draft, we gave feedback, but that will help provide the clarity that, you know, sex is real and sometimes it matters. At the same time, this week on Wednesday, the Supreme Court will give a ruling on a court case that has been going on for some years to clarify the question of whether Sex and the Equality Act means whether you're born male or female, or whether people get a piece of paper from the government, a gender recognition certificate, can be counted as having changed sex. So that only affects a relatively small number of people, but it's an important case. And these two issues between them are going to sort this out once and for all, and hopefully we will have some clarity. We know for a fact that sex matters in a great deal of cases, healthcare, for example. No piece of paper could change that.
And some of the cases we've had, I mean, there could be no sane person on the planet that would say anything other than the one opinion that the woman is correct to be, uncomfortable getting changed in front of a man, or, being in a situation where they are told that this changing room is for non-binary people, a completely invented phrase with no medical, biological, psychological backing to it whatsoever. And yet it's stuck up there on loo walls and stuff to, the idea that anybody would disagree with that. I mean, I don't know anybody that disagrees with, this common sense approach. So you do wonder who these corporations, arms of government and politicians, what's the gallery they're playing to here, Fiona? Who are they talking to?
I can only assume that it's years of indoctrination by the likes of Stonewall, that they somehow think this is the clever and progressive and modern way to look at the world. I mean, apparently this school, Miss Conway's school, said that they had a non-binary child, and all that means is a child who doesn't embrace sex stereotypes of either boy or girl. Well, that's a good thing. But you say that everyone recognizes that this is common sense, and yet people are not using the law as it stands to reinstate that kind of common sense. And I think the reason is that they expect, by and large, they expect women to just sublimate our feelings and ignore our discomfort because there are a few men who want access. And I really think if it was the other way around, if it was women who were making men feel uncomfortable, I don't think we'd be having this conversation.
And, it shouldn't need pointing out, but sometimes it does, that, sticking a wig on your head and wearing a pair of, knickers and a skirt doesn't make you a woman. In fact, it's a kind of slightly offensive stereotype of, if I do this, that makes me female. Well, that might be playing to a feminine, trait. I think Germaine Greer talks really well on this point, as you will be more than aware. Doesn't make you a woman. I mean, who the hell thinks it does?
I think that the transgender phenomenon covers a whole range of different feelings and motivations. I mean, girls, for example, younger women, sometimes feel very uncomfortable as they progress into adulthood, and they can have reasons to want to hide their femininity. That's quite different from the type of person you've just described, which is perhaps another stereotype under this framework. But there's all kinds of reasons why people want to break sex stereotypes, and frankly, so do I. I don't particularly want to conform and be put in a box. So it would be progressive if we could move away from that idea that some things make you a boy and that girls must dress in a certain way. But unfortunately, I don't think this school is doing much to advance that, because they seem to be determined to impose stereotypes and squash that kind of open-minded thinking.
Yeah, and this is an issue in an area that wasn't even around half an hour ago, and yet now, people are sticking it right smack bang in the middle of a curriculum, which is mysterious in itself. Listen, Fiona, great to get your take as ever. Fiona McAnena, who is the Director of Campaigns at Sex Matters. That's another one of those curious parts of life, isn't it, that we could sit there for ages and work out what's the root of all of this. And people will talk about Marxist ideology, the Frankfurt School, if you've ever read anything about all of that, and the sort of critical thinking, critical race theory and identity politics, it comes from that sort of place. And what feeds it is the fear of others to be accused of something bad. I think I've only just said that out loud really for the first time in those words. I think that loosely makes sense. If I don't adopt this, does that make me phobic in some kind of way? So I better adopt it, which is why you get these multi-million-pound companies, they are now, that will go around to big corporations and firms and say, we will, de-race your workforce, because you've probably got a lot of racists in there over there at the bank or wherever it is, and we want to winkle out the racists. And then the bank, well, we haven't got any racists, because we, oh, no, they don't even know they're racists. Really? What, have we got people, they don't even know it yet? No, because it works a very subliminal way. So it is kind of sitting there in their psychology. It floats around like this terrible thing that could manifest itself, boo, at any point. You never know when the wicked racist is going to manifest. So we've got ways to make sure that their subconscious bias, their racism, their innate phobias on gay issues, trans issues, we've got ways of getting rid of it. That's amazing. Come on in. How much does it cost? In fact, it doesn't matter how much it costs. Oh, by the way, since you ask, it's 30 grand per member of staff. Okay, well, we've got like 5,000 members of staff. It doesn't matter. You're going to get rid of the wicked racists, the transphobes and the homophobes and the sexists and all those bad people are all going to be go, because somebody's going to stand there with a spreadsheet, a flip chart and a presentation, standing on a little podium telling you about your privilege and whatever. That's a very simplified way of getting into this, but I don't think I'm far off, all right? I'm not explaining the whole picture. I don't think I'm far off on what is actually happening. And that's why organisations come along, Stonewall and Mermaids and others have come along and been able to kind of capitalise on that. Stonewall were a very incredibly effective gay rights organisation that did such good, and not just good work, but much needed and crucial work, because no one else was doing it. And they were saying stuff and talking about basic rules of equality, getting rid of bigotry. Everybody supported that. And then that job was mostly addressed. And then I can't speak for the people in charge, but it seemed like they thought, well, what are we going to do now? I know. We'll do the trans thing. I think, and the gender thing, more than anything. You can, any gender, any name, anything, identify how you like. And then the world has got to change, bend over, change rules and all manner of other bits of legislation, buildings, toilets, changing, you name it. We'll have to change it to accommodate you, even though you've just kind of chosen there's apparently 120 genders. 220 if you speak to some people. Spoiler alert, there isn't. Paul's in Lancashire. Back to that issue of British Steel. Paul, what have you got for us? Hi.
Yeah, hi Ian. Yeah, I'm just ringing really because I work in the engineering sector, machining on lathes and milling machines, and so I deal with a lot of raw metal coming in. And just listening today about, the whole scenario about, keeping the blast furnaces going in Scunthorpe and what have you, it strikes me that, we've let this thing just collapse over the last sort of 40 years, Sure. I mean, I remember the miners' strike. I was at secondary school then. It was a feud between two people, Scargill and Thatcher, really. And in a way, like you mentioned, all communities got decimated. We've got hundreds and hundreds of years of coal under his feet, and yet we just insist on importing it. We're not really doing anything to abate the green, to make the environment any better. We're just moving the carbon somewhere else. And it's not only that. You get the coal from overseas that comes in. Yep. We need a coking plant to make the coke, to make the steel. To make virgin steel, you need coke. So you need a coking plant, right? So who's going to build the coking plants, and then who's going to operate the coking plants? And True. Where's the skill? We've lost all the skill. Machines. I work on lathes and milling machines, so I make parts for that. I work on steam locomotives in the Heritage Railway and various other things. So nice. I do a lot of machining and stuff like that. And just a couple of things there is, one, we're losing all the skill. So even if we get all this resource, who's going to do it? Who's going to make the stuff? Who's going to keep things moving, for one? Yeah. Number two, in terms of self-sustainability in the coal mines, it costs an absolute fortune now to reopen the mines, because either the shafts are filled with landfill, waste or whatever. And number two, even if the shafts are intact and the coal seams, because the pit props now will have been left, and there will have been seams that have collapsed in on each other. Mm-hmm. So the seams aren't going to run true. So it's going to be very difficult to mine, You know, when you were mining, you're looking at mining a seam for miles because the seam stays intact, if you like, and then they obviously prop it as they're going along.
Yeah.
So all that's gone. It's going to be really difficult to even get any of that coal out of the ground. You know, you'd have to start dropping shafts.
Yeah, and that you're right, and that to some people that's how they wanted it, of course.
Yeah, of course it is. And then on top of that, you know, I mean, I've had, and this is no word of a lie, I've had quarter-inch steel plate come from China, right, and it's been sold as quarter-inch solid steel plate, and when I've actually received it, it's 2/8 plate welded together.
Wow.
Welded together. So basically what you do with that then...
Is that even safe?
No, it isn't. That's the point. So the fact is that you that steel, effectively, is scrap. You can't do anything with it. You can't make a pressure vessel with it.
You could in China.
You probably could in China.
You wouldn't.
You certainly wouldn't over here.
No, of course you wouldn't.
And we the stuff that we're buying is all sort of imported, and it's all, you know, even the grade of steel that you get now, EN8 steel, meant to be a fairly hard steel. You know, it comes in grades of hardness.
Sure.
But even that stuff now, it's not as good as it used to be.
And you hit a really good point on, you know, how would we ever get it back? And, well, yeah, I suppose technically we could, but not without an awful lot of effort and a shed load of money. Listen, Paul, I've got to move because we've run slightly over time, but that's brilliant. It's such a good call. Really enjoyed talking with you as well. Thank you, Paul in Lancashire. 0344 499 1000. We've got Jeremy Kyle on the other side of the news at 4. He's going to pop in before then to tell us what is going on. Can't wait for that. And more from you as well. 10 to 4 now. This is Talk.
When atrocities of this scale, I mean, imagine like the appalling Manchester Arena attack times hundreds, that when that happens, so many people in our society are not on the side of the victims, but are on the side of the death cult, are chanting support for Hamas and Hezbollah on Britain's streets. Why within days were hundreds of thousands of our fellow Brits supporting the people who were the rapists, the jihadists, the beheaders?
across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
One in from Michael here, who says, Ian, the country has been in slow decline for some decades now. It's not about money, it's about outcomes and class of position we now have. When I see an MP more interested in Palestine and an airport in Pakistan than worrying about UK interests, yeah, Mick, you make a really good point. And it's full of those little kind of examples, isn't it? That's just sort of a patchwork of nonsense that's going on. And you can sort of take your pick as to the kind. When I saw the Liberal Democrat MP last week attacking the Tory MP for robustly re-raising the grooming gang story, I just thought, who the hell are you talking? On whose behalf are you talking? To stand up as an experienced politician. This was the Lib Dem Tessa Munt, who got furious at Katie Lamb, who, if you saw the Katie Lamb bit in the dispatch box, very, very graphically and in context, talked about some of the cases of the grooming gang victims. And it required her to, use a lot of language that ordinarily wouldn't get a pass on, certainly, maybe on not even evening or nighttime telly, but it was within Parliament, so it was in context of the debate. And the Lib Dem MP Tessa Munt was furious about this. She, stood up and enunciated her disquiet at the minister and other members. And I just thought, who are you representing? And at the same point that has just been mentioned there, who are you representing when you get these kind of oddball MPs? You sort of wonder. Cliff says, interesting show. What intrigues me, why difference and diversity is considered such a benefit in itself. It's such a simple point. Such a cracking point. Oh, we are richer for, well, we might be. Nobody's saying we're not. Nobody's saying you have to not like diversity. But it's so the currency that it's kind of given, the gold status that it's given, doesn't really make any sense. I mean, I don't think if I went to live in another country, somehow me being there would be some incredible, huge benefit to the country because I'm like a different colour or a different gender or whatever. I can't imagine my presence there is, as Cliff says, in itself, some massive poverty. If I went on to invent stuff or do something or contribute massively in some kind of way or mark myself out or was an educator, a pioneer, yeah, then maybe. Does it really matter, says Cliff, what race, gender or sexual preference a doctor, police officer has? I would like to see media presenters questioning why the DEI brigade bang on. Well, as I'm sure you're aware, Cliff, we certainly do it on this show an awful lot. I find it one of the most confusing, bamboozling parts of living in the 21st century. And this one in from Don in Chelmsford. What about a rocket to Mars? I would put Crazy Ed Miliband and the rest of the government front bench on it. Harry and Meghan, of course, plus Z-list celebrities.
Talking of which...
Hey, Jeremy Kyle is here. Fantastic. How's it going?
Is it only me, and people think I'm being awful? I've never been a massive fan or that interested in space. Have we not got things in this world we could pay for instead of billions of quid of sending people up to some I don't know.
When I was a kid, I didn't have like pictures of planets on the wall.
I'd tell you what I had, but I'll get fired.
Yeah.
Sam Fox.
Well, there is that, yes.
Yeah.
Sam Fox.
Did you watch the golf?
Of course I didn't watch the golf. Why would I watch the golf?
Amazing piece of sporting theatre I've ever seen in my life.
It's not sporting theatre. It's a bloke with a stick and a ball, and he either lucks in the hole or he doesn't.
No,
it's like putting a bet on the horses. You either win or you don't.
Ian Collins played 9 holes, fell down 4 of them. Unbelievable sporting drama last night with Rory McIlroy. Can I just ask you very quickly, because you're sort of a doyen of brilliance, aren't you?
I am.
British Steel. So Boris Johnson gave it to the Chinese.
Yes.
He tried to screw us over, and the government have at the last minute pulled back.
Yes.
right? Well, doesn't that teach us something about giving our industries to foreign countries who might or might not have a motive? Why don't we make steel ourselves, called British Steel?
Correct.
And employ people and make a successful business. Why is that so difficult?
I don't know. But
Right.
apparently it's beyond the... Well, we did have a call just a second ago. A guy said, you know, if we wanted to dig it all up and start again, we could do it, but it would be massively expensive. Because people like Ed Miliband have lobbed concrete and cement down mine shafts and God knows what.
Talking of shafts, I'm joking. What's the big story of the day? Because this is a load. I mean, I'm slightly confused. Old lanky Ryan, he's given me a shed load today.
Has he given you a load? Two-tier policing. Lots of comment on that. Katy Perry went off in a rocket and returned 11 minutes later. You saw
She's
that?
going out with a bloke who's always got his bits out, isn't she?
Jeff
Orlando
Bezos.